Chapter 356. The Sword Sect Pagoda had existed since ancient times. No one knew when or who had built it. However, it was also because of this that the Sword Sect Pagoda was mysterious and simple. As soon as Yi Guqin stepped into the Sword Sect Pagoda, he felt an extremely pure and rich spiritual energy. This kind of spiritual energy actually caused the circulation of the true energy in his body to increase by quite a bit. This place is indeed mysterious. It is extremely beneficial for cultivation. Yi Guqin's eyes lit up. Staying here for 2 hours was equivalent to several days of hard cultivation outside. It was indeed the most famous cultivation treasure land in the Sword Sect Pagoda forest. At the same time, Yi Guqin could also faintly feel a kind of pressure. However, this was only the first level, so the pressure was only faint and did not affect him much. However, what surprised Yi Guqin was that as soon as he stepped into the Sword Sect Pagoda, the golden sword-shaped insignia on the back of his hand suddenly emitted a golden light. This made Yi Guqin slightly surprised. This sword-shaped insignia was the symbol of the 9th generation of the Sword Sect. It was originally green, but after leaving a mark on the cliff, the green sword-shaped insignia turned golden. Yi Guqin knew that the golden sword-shaped insignia represented the elite sequence. Fortunately, the Sword Sect Pagoda was a 1-by-1 challenge. There was no one else here except for Yi Guqin. Otherwise, Yi Guqin would really be in a bit of trouble. Rumble. At this moment, there was a sudden vibration all around. Yi Guqin looked around. He saw that there were 10 puppets surrounding him. These puppets were iron gray in color and had a hard texture. Yi Guqin did not use the Xianming heavy sword. Instead, he raised his hand and held it in the air. Surging golden true energy gushed out and condensed into a golden longsword. Boom! The 10 puppets took a step forward and rushed toward Yi Guqin like cannonballs. Yi Guqin also made a move. The power of his perfect body circulated, and a terrifying force that was comparable to that of a dragon and elephant surged in his body. He swung his sword horizontally, cutting through the air and emitting an ear-piercing whistling sound. Clang! Yi Guqin sent one of the puppets flying, leaving a faint mark on its surface. Their strength is comparable to the 4th transformation of the Divine Soul realm, but their bodies are abnormally hard. Yi Guqin was able to estimate the combat strength of these puppets with a single strike. But with his current cultivation, dealing with a Divine Soul 4th transformation puppet still did not have any pressure. Boom, boom, boom. Yi Guqin's sword was sometimes as swift as fire, and sometimes as steady as a mountain. He used these puppets to hone his swordsmanship. Soon, the 10 puppets were defeated, and the passageway to the 2nd level appeared. Yi Guqin stepped inside. Outside the Sword Sect Pagoda, everyone started discussing when they saw the 1st level light up. Looks like Sword Sect Yi has already passed the 1st level, and is beginning to enter the 2nd level. That's right, but why do I feel that it's not as fast as I imagined? Isn't the 1st level's test just a puppet with a 3rd transformation Divine Soul? Who knows? Maybe it's Sword Sect Yi's first time entering the Sword Sect Pagoda, so he's not used to it. Many inner court disciples were whispering to each other, but the time Yi Guqin spent on the 1st level had indeed exceeded their expectations. Although the time Yi Guqin spent couldn't be considered long, compared to Yi Guqin's current status and reputation, it didn't seem to match. Yi Guqin, it's your first time entering the Sword Sect Pagoda, so you're not used to it. From this point of view, it's me who has the advantage. But in the end, let the results speak for themselves. Yin Wushuang muttered in her heart. Just as everyone was guessing, Yi Guqin had already reached the 2nd level. Compared to the 1st level, the pressure on the 2nd level had actually doubled. As the pressure increased, Yi Guqin discovered that his strength was faintly suppressed. The 2nd level's test was also a puppet, but the number of puppets became 20. Furthermore, through the preliminary exchange, Yi Guqin roughly guessed the strength of these puppets. They were all comparable to Divine Soul 7th transformation experts. 20 puppets comparable to Divine Soul 7th transformation were not so easy to deal with. But Yi Guqin's strength far surpassed people of the same rank. It was not even weak compared to Divine Soul 9th transformation experts. Therefore, this 2nd level still did not pose a great threat to Yi Guqin. It just needed to spend a little bit of time. And at the periphery of the sword sect pagoda, everyone's gazes became doubtful once more. The time senior apprentice Brother Yi spent on the second level, was actually so long too? Isn't the second level only 5 divine soul fourth transformation puppets? With senior apprentice Brother Ye's strength, he should be able to pass through very quickly. Many people were puzzled. They had personally witnessed Yi Guqin's strength in the ranking battle previously. It was not weaker than Yan Wushuang. And Yan Wushuang only took a short moment to pass through the second level. Looks like Yi Guqin encountered some trouble in this sword sect pagoda, Bai Zichen said casually. His face finally revealed a trace of a relaxed expression. Everyone did not pay attention to it, but they also felt a trace of disappointment in their hearts. Perhaps it was because Yi Guqin had shocked them too much, so now that Yi Guqin did not create another miracle, this feeling of the gap was a little big. Yi Guqin, according to your strength, you shouldn't only have such a performance. Are you hiding your strength and waiting for later to erupt? Yan Wushuang frowned slightly. She also sensed that something was wrong. Inside the sword sect pagoda, figures intersected and light soared into the sky. Accompanied by a series of rumbles, these 20 divine soul 7th transformation puppets were all beaten to the ground. Yi Guqin panted slightly. Looks like this sword sect pagoda is indeed not easy to pass, Yi Guqin thought to himself. However, Yi Guqin had never passed through it before, so he did not know that the sword sect pagoda that he had passed through was already qualitatively different from the sword sect pagoda that others had passed through. The third level. Yi Guqin did not rest too much and directly entered the entrance of the third level. After entering the third level, the pressure doubled again. Yi Guqin could faintly feel that the circulation of the true energy in his body seemed to be a little sluggish. And the third level was also filled with puppets. However, there were a total of 40 puppets. Each puppet had a strength comparable to an 8th transformation Divine Soul 7th transformation, Divine Soul 7th transformation. Even with Yi Guqin's strength, he did not dare to let his guard down at this level. After all, his cultivation had been suppressed by the pressure and had been weakened a lot. In addition to the 48th transformation Divine Soul 8th transformation, Divine Soul 7th transformation, Divine Soul 7th transformation, Divine Soul 7th transformation, Divine Soul 7th transformation. Even Yi Guqin would not be too relaxed. He directly unleashed his half-transformed flawless body and rushed into the group of puppets. Outside the sword sect pagoda, the discussion never stopped. Sword sect Yi has entered the third level. Starting from the third level, the pressure will appear. Although it's very weak, it still has a certain impact. In addition, there are also 10 puppets of the 6th transformation Divine Soul 7th transformation. It's no longer something that ordinary disciples can pass through. But for senior brother Yi, this shouldn't be too difficult. Even now Chu Qingqi Yi Xia and the others had faces full of doubt. They did not know why Yi Guqin's speed was so slow. And on the third level, Yi Guqin used a full hour to completely defeat the 40 puppets of the 8th transformation Divine Soul 7th transformation, and enter the fourth level. In the eyes of the disciples outside, this speed was already considered relatively slow. This caused some people to reveal looks of disappointment. Chapter 357. Now, in the hearts of the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, it could be said that Yi Guqin was a leader and a role model. Even Yan Wushuang's reputation in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was faintly surpassed by Yi Guqin. However, it was also because of this that everyone still had high expectations for Yi Guqin. In the 1,000-sword forest and 1-sword cliff, Yi Guqin had created miracles that ordinary people could not do. Therefore, everyone naturally thought that Yi Guqin would definitely have a shocking performance in the Sword Sect Pagoda. However, now it seemed that although Yi Guqin's performance could not be said to be bad, it was definitely not amazing. The third level 1 hour. If it was an ordinary inner yard disciple, it might be a good result, but for Yi Guqin, it's a little mediocre, Gu Tuo said in a neutral tone. Elder Qing he did not reply. He only frowned and was puzzled. In the Sword Sect Pagoda, Yi Guqin had reached the 4th level. At the 4th level, the pressure was even more terrifying. It almost suppressed 20% of Yi Guqin's true qi. Not only that, but the pressure also contained a soul pressure that could restrict soul power. Fortunately, Yiguchen had a spiritual item like the meteorite demonic soul butterfly in his sea of consciousness. Therefore, the soul pressure did not affect Yiguchen too much. On the 4th level, there were finally no puppets. However, in front of Yiguchen, a young man holding a sword appeared. The young man was naturally not a real person, but an illusion constructed by the Sword Sect Pagoda. Although it was an illusion, it was no different from a real person. Defeat me and you can pass the 4th level. After the young man with the sword finished speaking, he did not waste any time and directly attacked. With this attack, Yiguchen could feel that the young man's strength was comparable to the 9 transformations of the divine soul. Not only that, the young man also had the wisdom of a human, and could perform sword skills. Therefore, the young man's strength was far from those puppets that only knew how to attack with their physical bodies. Even Yiguchen did not hold back, and began to use his sword techniques to attack. Outside the Sword Sect Pagoda, some disciples shook their heads as they looked at the 4th level that hadn't lit up for a long time. I remember that the 4th level's test seems to be a phantom of the Divine Soul 7th transformation. However, he knows some sword techniques and his strength is not bad. But why did senior brother Yi waste so much time? Some disciples were puzzled. Yiguchen, you didn't really fail at such an easy task, did you? Ji Ling was puzzled as well. Yin Wushuang also sensed that something was wrong, but she couldn't figure out why Yiguchen's speed was so slow. On the other hand, Bai Zichen had a faint smile on his face. If Yiguchen continued like this, it was unknown whether he could even pass the 6th floor, let alone the 7th floor. If that was the case, Yiguchen's reputation would undoubtedly drop. 2 hours later, Yiguchen also defeated the young man's shadow. The 4th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda lit up, and Yiguchen entered the 5th level. In fact, if Yiguchen was willing to take out the Xianming heavy sword, even if it was a phantom of the Divine Soul 9th transformation, he could quickly end the battle. However, cultivating in the Sword Sect Pagoda had extraordinary benefits. Secondly, the youth with the sword was quite agile. It was a good training for Yiguchen's swordsmanship, so he was not in a hurry to defeat him. After reaching the 5th level, Yiguchen realized that the strong pressure had left Yiguchen with only 20% of his genuine qi and soul power. The opponents on the 5th level were 2 phantoms of the Divine Soul 9th transformation experts. However, when they drew their swords, Yiguchen's face changed slightly. This was because the power of their sword moves had reached the level of a king-level sword principle, 2 phantoms of the Divine Soul 9th transformation, and could perform king-level sword techniques. As for Yiguchen, he was suppressed and could only use 20% of his genuine qi and soul power. This was definitely an unfair battle. Now it's time to give it my all. Yiguchen did not hesitate and directly took out the Xianming heavy sword. However, when the Xianming heavy sword was in his hand, Yiguchen's genuine qi and soul power were suppressed again. This was because the Xianming heavy sword had such a characteristic. It could suppress genuine qi and soul power, in addition to its terrifying weight. If it were someone else, they would not even have the ability to use it. However, Yiguchen had the dragon elephant power, the ultimate sea of qi and the sea of consciousness that was far beyond an ordinary person. Hence, he still had the power to fight. Boom. In Yiguchen's body, the 360 golden sword veins that had not been used for a long time appeared again. In an instant, Yiguchen's aura sword. Although the Xianming heavy sword was not sharpened, it carried a terrifying sword qi. Boom. When Yiguchen drew his sword, the entire Sword Sect Pagoda seemed to tremble for a moment. A terrifying shockwave spread out. The 2 shadows of the 9 changes of the godly soul also attacked at the same time. The power of the king-level sword arts was released. The time Yiguchen spent on the 5th level was even longer. He lasted for a total of 8 hours. The people outside the Sword Sect Pagoda were a little anxious. The test on the 5th level should only be a shadow of the 8 changes of the godly soul realm. Moreover, it can display a superior spiritual sword art. At the same time, the pressure should be able to suppress about 30% of one's strength. With senior brother Ye's strength, it should not be a problem. Many people were puzzled, especially the inner yard elites who had passed the 5th level. Because they had experienced it personally, they knew how difficult it was to pass the 5th level. It might not be easy for them, but in their minds, Yi Guqin should have no problem passing the 5th level. 8 hours later, the 5th floor lit up, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. This meant that Yi Guqin had entered the 6th level. The 6th level was also the best result for most of the inner yard elites, including Wang Xiaotian, Li Lingxiao, and the others. As for the 7th level, apart from the elders and above, only Yan Wushuang and Bai Zichen had passed it. I wonder if senior brother Yi can pass the 6th level? With senior brother Ye's speed, I think it's a little difficult. In the beginning, the people in the inner yard had high hopes for Yi Guqin. Not to mention the 6th level, some people guessed that Yi Guqin might pass the 7th level. But now, it seemed that no one was sure if Yi Guqin could pass the 6th level. Yi Guqin, you're still a human after all, not a god. It's impossible for you to keep creating miracles, Bai Zichen thought to himself. He thought that with Yi Guqin's current performance, it would be good enough if he could pass the 6th level at most. In this way, the best results this time would be him and Yan Wushuang. Yan Wushuang was also staring at the Sword Sect pagoda. She didn't really believe that the youth who defeated her with the pathos of heaven would dim here. The test of the 6th level is 3 phantoms of the Divine Soul 9 transformations with king-level sword skills. Yi Guqin, how much time are you going to spend this time? Yan Wushuang raised her head and looked at the 6th level of the Sword Sect pagoda, revealing her perfectly curved chin and jade-like neck. On the 6th level, Yi Guqin was drenched in sweat and panted as he looked at the 5 phantoms of the Divine Soul 9 transformations before him. Not only that, but most importantly, these 5 phantoms of the Divine Soul 9 transformations all possessed a type of sword intent. Moreover, when the sword intents fused with each other, it actually seemed to form a sword formation. This is the sword will of the 5 elements? Yi Guqin was also a little shocked. Why was the test so difficult from the 6th level onwards? How did Yan Wushuang and the others pass so quickly? Now, even Yi Guqin started to suspect that the Sword Sect pagoda was giving him special treatment. Chapter 358. Yi Guqin had also observed from outside the Sword Sect pagoda before. Other than those ordinary disciples, Yan Wushuang, Bai Zichen, and the others were all very fast. Therefore, Yi Guqin already had a little confidence at that time. However, after entering the Sword Sect pagoda, Yi Guqin realized that the difficulty of the pagoda was not small. At the same time, he was a little puzzled as to why Yan Wushuang and the others were so fast. Could it be because Yi Guqin's gaze suddenly fell on the golden sword-shaped emblem on the back of his hand? If Yi Guqin had to say that the only thing on his body that could make the Sword Sect pagoda give him special treatment was probably the elite sequence emblem. As expected, the Sword Sect pagoda has an inseparable relationship with the Sword Sect. Perhaps I can find some clues on the 9th level. Yi Guqin's eyes lit up. However, what he needed to solve now was the crisis at hand. The 5 phantoms of the 9 transformations of the Divine Soul might only be a little difficult for Yi Guqin, but it could not be considered a critical juncture. However, if the 5 phantoms all had a type of sword essence, and the sword essences could cooperate with each other to form a sword formation, then their strength would be multiplied. It would not be as simple as 5 phantoms added together. The 5 elements sword essences of these 5 phantoms are only simulated by the Sword Sect pagoda, but it's also very beneficial for me to comprehend the 5 elements sword essences. Not only did Yi Guqin not have a trace of fear, but he also had a trace of excitement from the challenge. He brandished his Xianming heavy sword and directly rushed forward. The 5 phantoms each had one of the 5 sword essences of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. One of the phantoms brandished his sword, and the sword momentum was like a raging fire. The sword momentum of the other phantoms carried exuberant vitality. It was the wood sword essence. Wood helped the fire, causing the power of the sword to be even stronger. Yi Guqin did not hold back at all. The 360 golden sword veins around his body bloomed like a bright golden star map. He used the Xianming heavy sword to perform the void sword technique, and a terrifying 1,000 layers of sword wave spread out in an instant. Coupled with the enhancement of the sword veins, it caused the sword wave to turn the sky and earth upside down, rumbling and shaking. Their moves collided, sword light wantonly, and ripples spread out with a roar. Fortunately, the sword sect pagoda had stood tall since the ancient times, and its interior was hard like a rock, so it wouldn't be shaken by this impact. At the same time, the other three phantoms also took the opportunity to attack, each displaying their own sword intent. The 5 types of sword intents worked together seamlessly, making Yi Guqin feel a little overwhelmed. Yi Guqin directly pushed the limit of the 10,000 feet Qi in his dantian to the limit. Despite the pressure of this place, the terrifying golden true energy still surged out from Yi Guqin's body. Boundless heaven sword art, heavenly net. Yi Guqin's Netherism heavy sword swung out a profound trajectory that formed a net that seemed to cover the heavens and the earth. And it completely trapped all those sword moves within it before being minced into pieces by the sword lights. After that, Yi Guqin also used the Xianming heavy sword to comprehend the edgeless sword essence while fighting with the 5 phantoms. The battle lasted for 10 hours. Although it was a long time, not a single inner courtyard disciple or elder left the sword sect pagoda. This was because they all wanted to know the final result of Yi Guqin's challenge. It's already been 10 hours, and the 6th floor still hasn't lit up. Back then, even senior sister Yin only used 2 hours. As for that by Zichen, he only used 4 hours. Could it be that sword sect master Yi is deliberately tempering himself? Just as the outside world was guessing, Yi Guqin, who was on the 6th floor, ran into trouble. Because the 5 phantoms had relied on their respective sword intents to form a 5-element sword array that surrounded Yi Guqin. This 5-element sword array was extremely profound. Based on the principle of 5 elements, when one person attacked with his sword and the others assisted, the power would be multiplied by 5. 5 experts in the 9 transformations of Divine Soul stacked the power of their sword moves together. The power of each move wasn't any weaker than an ordinary profound martial realm expert's casual attack. Although it's a little troublesome, it still can't stop me. Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin held the Xianming heavy sword in one hand and grasped the void with the other. Golden Zhen Qi condensed into a golden longsword. He attacked with both swords and used the dual sword divergence art once again. After using the dual sword divergence art, Yi Guqin was equivalent to 2 people. Not only that, Yi Guqin also used the Hearts-off sword intent and the Shura sword intent at the same time. Under the impact of the 2 sword intents, the sword array formed by the 5 sword intents became unstable and began to sway. Whoosh! The 5 phantoms attacked at the same time. The 5 sword intents merged into one and stabbed at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin used the Hearts-off sword intent to perform the Tai Chi sword art. On the other hand, he used the Shura sword intent to enhance the god-slaying sword art and perform the 4th move, 3 paths boom. The Tai Chi sword art barely blocked the killing move of the 5 sword intents, and the 3 incomparably sharp blood-red rivers also struck the 3 phantoms. Yi Guqin took the opportunity to attack and once again used the 5th move, Yama. The fierce and powerful sword with the aura of blood directly swept through the 5 phantoms and destroyed them one by one. The 6th level was passed. Just as Yi Guqin destroyed the 5 phantoms, the 6th level of the sword sect pagoda suddenly lit up. He finally passed. Looks like it's a little difficult for sword sect Yi to pass the pagoda. Many people heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts. They were afraid that Yi Guqin wouldn't even be able to pass the 6th level. That wouldn't be in line with his strength and reputation. Yi Guqin, can you pass the 7th level? Yan Wushuang's beautiful eyes were deep as she stared at the 7th level of the sword sect pagoda. Among the inner court disciples, only she and Bai Zichen had passed the 7th level, so she knew how difficult it was. With Yi Guqin's current speed, Yan Wushuang doubted if he could pass the 7th level. While everyone was watching, Yi Guqin also stepped into the 7th level. The 7th level of the sword sect pagoda was incomparably empty. As soon as Yi Guqin entered the 7th level, he felt a terrifying pressure that almost caused his true chi and soul power to be imprisoned. The current Yi Guqin was almost unable to use his true chi and soul power. Opposite Yi Guqin, there was a gray vortex that was still spinning. With the arrival of Yi Guqin, the vortex slowly condensed into a figure that was no different from Yi Guqin. Is it this kind of test again? Yi Guchen muttered to himself as he looked at the figure that was almost identical to him. He'd experienced such an illusion where he fought against himself in the 18 blood prisons of the Bloodthirst Tower. Of course, Yi Guchen was certain that this wasn't an illusion, but the strange power of the Sword Sect Pagoda. If he wanted to pass the 7th level, he had to defeat his other self. Fortunately, Yi Guchen didn't sense any true qi from his other self. Otherwise, it would really be difficult to fight. However, what Yi Guchen didn't know was that when Yan Wushuang and the others were challenging the pagoda, they were able to retain 30% of their true qi and soul power. However, when it came to Yi Guchen, he didn't have a trace of true qi. Just like the shadow of his other self, there was a fundamental difference in difficulty between retaining 30% of one's true qi and soul power, and not retaining anything at all. Chapter 359. Staring at his other self, Yi Guchen's face was cold and solemn. He did not act rashly. Instead, he performed the first move of the god-slaying sword technique, blood slaughter. A blood-red sword light shot out. Just as Yi Guchen drew his sword, the shadow on the opposite side also drew his sword at the same time. That sword was also a bloodbath. When the two collided, the sword light was annihilated. Just as I expected. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed with a dark light. It seemed that the shadow was able to copy Yi Guchen's own moves as he had imagined. No wonder Yan Wushuang and the others were stuck at the 7th level for so long. This level is indeed not something that anyone can pass, but for me, this is the best place to practice the edgeless sword essence. Yi Guchen's eyes had a hint of excitement. After he obtained the Xianming heavy sword, he could already begin to comprehend the edgeless sword essence. The comprehension of the edgeless sword essence was a process of creating something from nothing. Although the illusory figure could imitate Yi Guchen's moves, it was impossible for it to comprehend a kind of sword essence out of nothing. Therefore, as long as Yi Guchen could comprehend a trace of the embryonic form of the edgeless sword essence, he could naturally pass this level. Come on! Yi Guchen held the Xianming heavy sword in his hand and clashed with the self-shadow. Yi Guchen did not use any sword moves. Instead, he simply performed the most basic moves. Hack, chop, collapse, lift, block, cut, stab, sweep, chop, slice. This was the true essence of the edgeless sword essence. The heavy sword was edgeless. There was no need for any gorgeous and complicated sword moves. Only the simplest moves could erupt with the greatest power. Breaking 10,000 pounds with one force was the true essence of the edgeless sword essence. After Yi Guchen completely comprehended the edgeless sword essence, when he casually swung his sword, it would erupt with an endless vibration sword wave that roared in all directions. While Yi Guchen was training, the people outside had been waiting for an entire day. However, everyone also knew that the 7th floor was not so easy to pass. Yi Guchen, with your previous speed, you should give up on this level as soon as possible. Bai Zichen stared fixedly at the 7th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda. He did not want Yi Guchen to create another miracle. On the other side, Yan Wushuang also had a rare trace of nervousness. She shamelessly challenged Yi Guchen to a rematch. She had already challenged the Sword Sect Pagoda many times, but this was Yi Guchen's first time challenging the pagoda. If she was still unable to defeat Yi Guchen, then Yan Wushuang would really be ashamed. This wait lasted for a total of 3 days. 3 days later, on the 7th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda, Yi Guchen seemed to have fallen into a state of indulgence. Every time he swung the Xianming heavy sword, a profound sword concept would faintly suffuse the air. As this concept suffused the air, waves of sword wave also washed out from the Xianming heavy sword. On the other hand, the illusory figure was obviously unable to comprehend this profound sword concept, so the power of his moves started to gradually weaken compared to Yi Guchen's. The heavy sword has no edge, and it doesn't pursue extreme complexity and sharpness. Instead, it seeks to return to simplicity, and every move is completely natural. There was no need to mention Yi Guchen's talent in the sword Dao. At this moment, a faint light appeared in his dazed expression. At a certain moment, Yi Guchen's eyes suddenly lit up. He held the Xianming heavy sword with both hands, and swung it out once again. It looked ordinary and nothing special. However, as this sword was swung out, An invisible and terrifying vibration swept out and directly enveloped the illusory figure. On the other hand, the illusory figure was unable to execute such a powerful move. In an instant, the illusory figure collapsed. At the same time, the 7th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda suddenly lit up. This caused everyone outside the Sword Sect Pagoda, including the two elders, Qing He and Gu Tuo, to be shocked. Although Yi Guqin had spent a few times more time than Yan Wushuang and Bai Zichen. However, as long as he could pass through it, everything would not be a problem. He really passed. Yan Wushuang clenched her jade-like hands tightly. Her delicate face was filled with a complicated expression for a moment. She originally thought that she would definitely win if she could pass through the 7th level. However, she did not expect Yi Guqin, who was challenging the pagoda for the first time, to have the ability to pass through the 7th level. Although he had spent a lot more time than her, this battle was only about the result. With Yi Guqin's current results, it was already a draw with Yan Wushuang. Looks like the battle between senior sister Yan and senior brother Yi will end in a draw. Some of the surrounding disciples' gazes also fell on Yan Wushuang. However, to Yan Wushuang, she was somewhat unable to accept the result of a draw. What she wanted was a victory, not a draw. Shuang, or don't take it to heart. Jiling walked to Yan Wushuang's side and comforted her by placing her hand on her shoulder. I can't accept this result. Yan Wushuang's chest rose and fell. It was obvious that her emotions were fluctuating. On the other side, Bai Zichen's expression was also somewhat ugly. Although Yi Guqin's performance this time could not be considered as extremely stunning, it was already on par with him. Just as everyone was waiting for Yi Guqin to come out of the pagoda, they discovered that Yi Guqin did not come out. This scene stunned many of the inner court disciples for a moment. Could it be that brother Yi? Chu Qingqi, Yi Xia, and the others were also stunned as if they had thought of something, and their faces were filled with shock. Could it be that senior brother Yi is going to challenge the 8th level? An inner court disciple could not hide his shock as he shouted. This caused the minds of all the disciples to buzz. The 8th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda. It was a place that only Feng Manlu, Qiushan, and Yan Changge had the ability to pass through. At this moment, even Yan Wushuang's jade-like face froze. Her red lips were slightly open as if she was in disbelief. This was because she knew how difficult it was to pass through the 7th level. She had to face another version of herself. Even if Yan Wushuang could preserve 30% of her true energy and soul power, she had exhausted all her energy to pass through. However, Yi Guqin actually still had the energy to pass through the 8th level. From this point alone, Yi Guqin had already won. This caused Yan Wushuang's beautiful face to turn slightly pale, and her delicate body faintly trembled. Moreover, this was because Yan Wushuang did not know the difficulty of Yi Guqin's pagoda. If she knew, her reaction would not be just like this. Can Sword Sect Yi pass through the 8th level? Outside the Sword Sect Pagoda, everyone's gazes were fixated on the 8th level. Within the Sword Sect Pagoda, Yi Guqin's footsteps had finally stepped onto the 8th level. However, the moment he stepped onto the 8th level, the surrounding space seemed to have instantly changed. He was situated in an empty space. There was nothing but swords between the heavens and the earth. Countless flying swords densely packed together covered the heavens and the earth. At the same time, an ethereal voice resounded in the heavens and the earth. 10,000 swords destruction, you can pass through. A light flashed in Yi Guqin's eyes. Just as his voice sounded out, the countless flying swords in the heavens and the earth charged towards Yi Guqin in unison. This was the test of the 8th level, the baptism of 10,000 swords. Chapter 360. As far as the eye could see, there were only swords. Other than swords, there was nothing else. Just as the illusory voice fell, the countless flying swords that were originally circling around seemed to have received an order, and rushed toward Yi Guqin. The flying swords that covered the sky and covered the earth swept over together. The scene was no less spectacular than Yi Guqin's million returning swords. In fact, it was even more magnificent. However, it was not a good thing for Yi Guqin. He turned the Xianming heavy sword around. The thick and broad sword was like a black shield that covered Yi Guqin's body. Yi Guchen did not find any spiritual inscription arrays on the Xianming heavy sword, so he did not know the grade of the Xianming heavy sword. However, Yi Guchen was very clear about one characteristic of the heavy sword. It was sturdiness, unparalleled sturdiness. It was as though nothing could break it. It was also because of this that the sword could attack and defend. Clang, clang, clang. In the next moment, Yi Guchen felt countless flying swords colliding with the Xianming heavy sword. A strong impact force caused Yi Guchen to retreat a few hundred feet. The blood in his chest could not help but churn. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. After a round of collision, countless flying swords surrounded Yi Guchen again and surrounded him. I can't just passively defend. Yi Guchen frowned. The voice had said that one could only pass through by destroying the 10,000 swords. If that's the case then. Yi Guchen glanced around. He did not hold back anymore and completely unleashed his strength. Soul-devouring secret skill. Yi Guchen directly used the trump card that he had not used for a long time, the soul-devouring secret skill. After advancing to the 6th transformation of Divine Soul, his soul-devouring secret skill had also increased accordingly. With Yi Guchen's body as the starting point, a terrifying devouring power began to frantically devour the surrounding spiritual qi. The spirit energy within the Sword Sect Pagoda was extremely dense, so the might of the spirit-devouring secret technique rose explosively. Divine Soul 7th Transformation. 8th Divine Soul Transformation. Divine Soul 9 Transformations. In the end, Yi Guchen's cultivation had almost reached the peak of the 9 transformations of the Divine Soul. As for the hidden latch of life and death, it was a threshold. Even the spirit-devouring secret skill could not allow Yi Guchen to possess the power of the hidden latch of life and death. A terrifying power gathered in his body. If it wasn't for his perfect body, he might have been in danger of exploding. Boom. Yi Guchen's real qi and soul power spread out. The 360 golden sword veins in his body were pushed to the limit. At the same time, his flawless body also burst out. Golden light flowed on his skin, mixed with a greenish gold light, making him look perfect and flawless. Yi Guchen's fingers clenched again, and an incomparably solid golden real qi longsword condensed. He held the golden longsword in his left hand and the Xianming heavy sword in his right hand, once again performing the dual sword divergence. At this moment, Yi Guchen's battle strength was almost at its peak. He struck out with both swords, performing different sword techniques. The powerful sword qi tore through the air, and countless flying swords in the surroundings were shattered by the sword qi. But what followed was even more flying swords. Sword essence out. Yi Guchen once again released his sword essence, performing the Tai Chi sword technique with the hard and soft sword essence, and reflected the power of the flying swords. At the same time, he pushed the Shura sword essence to the limit. The vigorous sword essence turned into a majestic sea of blood, surging with a loud bang. An extremely illusory 18 levels of blood prison appeared. The 18 levels of Shura blood sea reappeared. God-slaying sword technique Yama. Boom. A boundless blood-red figure rose from the ground behind Yi Guchen. Just like Yi Guchen, it held a sword in its hand and swept out. It was as if Yama had attacked, and the boundless blood-red sword light shattered a large number of flying swords around it. Come again, purple void mysterious thunder. Yi Guchen growled, and the silver-purple void mysterious thunder burst out. The thunder formed by the fusion of two different types of thunder was incomparably powerful. The entire area was filled with lightning, as if it was a sea of lightning. Countless flying swords were shattered by the power of the strange thunder. It could be said that Yi Guchen, who had displayed his full cultivation, was so powerful that it was somewhat terrifying. If it were the 5 phantoms on the 6th level who possessed the sword essence, if they encountered the current Yi Guchen, they would only be killed in an instant. But the test on the 8th level was far from that simple. Although Yi Guchen's powerful means had shattered most of the flying swords in this world in a short time, there were still countless flying swords in the void. However, in the endless void, there were still countless flying swords that appeared out of thin air. Like a school of fish, they swam towards Yi Guchen. These flying swords are endless. Yi Guchen's eyes revealed a thoughtful look. Clang, clang, clang. The countless flying swords that appeared once again pierced through the air. Yi Guchen blocked them with his sword, but his body continued to bleed. To pass the 8th level, it's definitely not so simple to destroy the flying swords. There must be a way. Yi Guchen thought to himself as he defended against the onslaught of the flying swords. He had the sword demon talent, and with the sword heart seed, his comprehension ability was extraordinary. As he pondered, Yi Guchen seemed to have some clues. The 8th level. Senior Feng has always been in seclusion on the 8th level, and it was also on the 8th level that Senior Feng comprehended the unity of man and sword. Could it be? Yi Guchen's mind shook. He immediately withdrew all his means. He even put away the Xianming heavy sword. Then he took out a leaf of enlightenment from his origin ring and put it in his mouth. Then a Dao rhyme gradually spread out. Yi Guchen directly sat on the ground with his legs crossed. The surrounding flying swords were still relentlessly rushing towards Yi Guchen. Every time they attacked, there were countless bloody wounds on Yi Guchen's body. At this moment, Yi Guchen's clothes were in tatters, and there were numerous bloody wounds on his body. It was a ghastly sight. But surprisingly, the flying swords did not injure Yi Guchen's important parts, such as his heart. Facing such a test, Yi Guchen did not move or shake. He closed his eyes and comprehended. There is nothing else in this world, only swords. This is not only a test, but also an opportunity. It is precisely because there are only swords here that it cannot accommodate other external objects. And my own body is an external object to the thousands of swords here. Therefore, the only way to pass this test is to imagine my own body as a sword. And to transform my body into a sword is the so-called. Yi Guchen suddenly opened his eyes, and a wave of enlightenment instantly surged into his mind. Unity of man and sword. Just as Yi Guchen figured this out, the thousands of swords in the world that were attacking him suddenly froze in place. It was as if at this moment, Yi Guchen's body faintly carried sword qi. And at this moment, the thousands of swords around him gradually regarded Yi Guchen as a sword, and as one of their own. It was also at this moment that the sword heart seed that had already taken root in Yi Guchen's heart cracked again, and an extremely tiny bud seemed to be about to grow out. When the sword heart seed took root, it meant that Yi Guchen had comprehended the sword heart illumination. And when this bud completely grew out, it meant that Yi Guchen had comprehended the unity of man and sword. At this moment, although this bud had only just begun to grow, it also meant that Yi Guchen had already begun to see the profundity of the unity of man and sword. This was equivalent to opening the door for Yi Guchen to comprehend the unity of man and sword. And it was also at this moment that the 8th floor of the Sword Sect Pagoda lit up. At this moment, all the elders and disciples outside the pagoda were shocked. Chapter 361. Outside the Sword Sect Pagoda. When they saw the 8th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda light up, the gazes of those inner court disciples that were originally bored stiff from waiting there froze one by one. Their hearts were shaken to the extreme. Not only the disciples but even Qing He, Gu Tuo, and the other elders were stunned on the spot. They were all people who had passed the 8th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda. Because of this, they knew how difficult the 8th level was. Moreover, the difficulty of the 8th level that they had experienced was not on the same level as the difficulty that Yi Guchen had experienced. The obstacle they encountered on the 8th level was a thorny path filled with long swords. However, Yi Guchen had to face a world of swords. They did not know that Yi Guchen's difficulty was higher than theirs. However, it did not stop Qing He and the others from being shocked. Genius! Yi Guchen is a real sword principle genius. Even Elder Qing He could not hide the shock in his heart at this moment. He could not help but exclaim. Gu Tuo was also speechless. He had a grudge against Yi Guchen, and had always been prejudiced and hostile against Yi Guchen. However, Yi Guchen's performance time and time again made him, an elder, feel helpless. Previously, he had said that Yi Guchen's performance in the Sword Sect Pagoda was not outstanding, and could only be considered mediocre. However, the light that lit up on the 8th level was like a fierce slap to his old face. Gu Tuo could not describe how he felt at that moment. Even with Qing He and the other elders' strength and status, they were so shocked, let alone the inner yard disciples. Most of the people there respected Yi Guchen to begin with. Thus, when they saw the 8th level light up, they exclaimed in surprise. On the contrary, Yan Wushuang's pretty face was completely frozen. Her delicate figure stiffened on the spot, and her originally rosy lips had turned slightly pale. The 8th level. He passed the 8th level. Yan Wushuang murmured and shook her head slightly as if she could not believe that everything in front of her was real. Only father, Uncle Feng, and Elder Qiushan can pass the 8th level. Yi Guchen actually passed it. Yan Wushuang smiled, but there was a trace of self-mockery and helplessness in her smile. Originally, she had shamelessly requested to compete with Yi Guchen again, which was already unreasonable. She thought that she could win, but she still lost in the end. At that moment, Yan Wushuang finally knew why Feng Manlu insisted on Yi Guchen and not her. Sword sect. Yan Wushuang lowered her head slightly as if she had lost her soul. Her beautiful eyes were lifeless. On the other side, Bai Zichen Wushuang took a few steps back. He seemed to find it difficult to stand still. The fact that Yi Guchen had passed the 8th level was like a bolt from the blue to him. This time, Yi Guchen had left him behind once again. The result of passing through the 8th level was enough to completely erase Yi Guchen's mediocre performance from before. At that moment, in the eyes of everyone, only the shock of creating a miracle was left. Since I, Bai Zichen, exist in this sword sect pagoda forest, why should Yi Guchen exist? Bai Zichen laughed bitterly and was speechless. As for Wang Xiaotian, Li Lingxiao, and the others, they swore in their hearts to forget the enmity from before and never offend Yi Guchen again. While everyone in the outside world was shocked by Yi Guchen's passing of the 8th level. On the 8th level, Yi Guchen sat cross-legged in the world of 10,000 swords. A figure appeared not far away. Senior Feng. Yi Guchen was not surprised at all when he saw this figure. Feng Manlu was always in closed-door cultivation on the 8th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda. You really are the destined Sword Sect master. Feng Manlu placed his hands behind his back. Yi Guchen stood up and asked, "Does Senior know something about the Sword Sect Pagoda?" "There may be some clues on the 9th level, but I can't enter the 9th level," said Feng Manlu. It was also at this moment that a door appeared in the void. "That's the entrance to the 9th level," said Feng Manlu. Although he could not see it, he could sense it. Yi Guchen approached the door. It was at this moment that the golden sword-shaped emblem on the back of his hand released light again, causing the door to tremble. Yi Guchen lifted his hand, wanting to push open the door, but found that the door did not budge. Yi Guchen was a little puzzled. Even with Senior Feng and the others' divine dwelling stage strength, they can't enter. This means that they lack some kind of qualification. I may be able to make this door tremble because I'm the sword sex sequence, but what I lack is strength. Yi Guchen pondered. Feng Manlu and the others had the strength of a cultivation level, but did not have the qualifications to enter the sequence. Yi Guchen was in the sequence and could make the door tremble, but could not open it. Therefore, Yi Guchen deduced that he could not open the door because he was not strong enough. If the strength of the divine spirit stage is not enough, then I'll try again after I break through to the life and death chamber, Yi Guchen thought. Although he was curious about the 9th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda, he was not in a hurry. Moreover, he had already gained a lot on the 8th level. He had obtained the opportunity to comprehend the unity of man and sword. Thinking of this, Yi Guchen's mind suddenly flashed and he asked, "Senior Feng, I heard that the reincarnation sword lotus is on the 8th level." Yi Guchen did not forget that the sword sect's ultimate technique, the reincarnation sword lotus, was on the 8th level. Even if it was an incomplete sword sect's ultimate technique, its power was definitely something to look forward to. "You can observe the flying swords here," suggested Feng Manlu. Yi Guchen suddenly understood and scanned his surroundings. The more he observed, the more astonished Yi Guchen's eyes became. This was because he discovered that the flying swords that filled the sky faintly formed the shape of a lotus. The reincarnation sword lotus ultimate technique was actually hidden among the flying swords that filled the sky. As expected of the sword sect's ultimate technique, it can't be measured by common sense. Even with Yi Guchen's experience, he was slightly amazed. However, This also represented the extraordinariness of the sword sect's ultimate technique. It was far from ordinary sword arts. I wonder which generation of sword sect's ultimate technique created this reincarnation sword lotus. Yi Guchen thought inwardly. Every generation of sword grandmasters would create their own unique sword grandmasters. For example, 8th generation sword sect's Yi Tianxing's heaven-splitting sword soul. There was also the 7th generation sword sect's Heaven and Earth One sacred sword. Yi Guchen even thought that if he really became the 9th generation sword sect's ultimate technique in the future, he would also create an ultimate technique that belonged to the 9th generation sword sect's ultimate technique, and pass it down to the younger generation of sword sect. Of course, this kind of thing was still too far away for Yi Guchen, so he did not think too much about it. However, what made Yi Guchen feel a little troubled was that if he wanted to comprehend the reincarnation sword lotus and further comprehend the union of man and sword, he would not be able to do it in a short period of time. However, it was impossible for him to stay there forever. Yi Guchen, rest assured and cultivate here. In the future, you will be like me and have the right to enter the sword sect pagoda at will. Feng Manlu said faintly. That's not very appropriate, Yi Guchen said. Although he did not have any objections, it might be a little unfair to the inner yard disciples. It doesn't matter. You have the right. I am well aware of all the stages that you have passed, Feng Manlu said. Yi Guchen's eyes flickered slightly. It seemed that Feng Manlu already knew that the difficulty of the stages that he had passed was different from the others. I will explain to the people outside. You can rest assured and comprehend here. Feng Manlu said and immediately left the place. When Yi Guchen heard this, he no longer hesitated and began to comprehend in peace. Chapter 362. Outside the Sword Sect Pagoda, there was a hubbub of voices that lingered for a long time. After all, Yi Guchen had created another miracle. Only the top 3 experts of the Sword Sect Pagoda had passed the 8th floor. However, Yi Guchen was able to pass the 8th floor with his divine soul realm cultivation. In the hearts of the inner court disciples, Yi Guchen had long been their spiritual target. Some even believed that if Yi Guchen grew stronger in the future, his strength wouldn't be any weaker than Feng Manlu and Yan Chang'e. Yi Guchen would be the 4th expert of the Sword Sect Pagoda in the future. Sword Sect Master Yi hasn't come out yet. Could it be that he wants to pass the 9th floor? A disciple couldn't help but guess. Forget it. Even the Sect Master and Lord Feng Manlu can't enter the 9th floor. As for Sword Sect Master Yi, he might have a chance in the future, but I'm afraid it'll be difficult for him now. Some people shook their heads. Just as everyone was discussing, a ray of light flashed outside the 8th floor of the Sword Sect Pagoda, and a figure appeared. Could it be that senior brother Yi has come out? Many disciples, including the elders, looked over. It's Lord Feng Manlu. When they saw the figure clearly, the elders and disciples cupped their hands and bowed. The Sword Sect Pagoda's trial has ended. Everyone can leave now. Feng Manlu said indifferently. Lord Feng Manlu, that Yi Guchen. Elder Qing, he said hesitantly. In the future, Yi Guchen will have the qualifications to cultivate in the Sword Sect Pagoda for a long time like me. Feng Manlu's tone was calm as he waved his hand casually. What? Everyone was shocked when they heard this. Even Elder Qing He and Elder Gu Tua were a little stunned. This was already considered a privilege. Even elders like them didn't have the qualifications to stay in the Sword Sect Pagoda every day. For a long time, the Sword Sect Pagoda had been Feng Manlu's place for seclusion. This was also a privilege that Yan Chang'e had tacitly allowed. However, other than Feng Manlu, Yi Guchen also had the qualifications to enter the Sword Sect Pagoda. I refuse to accept this. Suddenly a voice rang out. When the disciples looked over, they saw Bai Zichen's face was pale. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to speak. Right now, Yi Guchen was like a huge mountain pressing down on Bai Zichen's head. If Yi Guchen was able to cultivate behind closed doors in the Sword Sect Pagoda for a long time, then Bai Zichen was unable to imagine how swift his improvement would be. It was precisely because of this that Bai Zichen had no choice but to bite the bullet and speak even if he risked defending wind-sweeping tower. Lord Feng Manlu, even though Yi Guchen has passed through the 8th level of the Sword Sect Tower, He is only an inner court disciple after all. If he is allowed to cultivate in the Sword Sect Tower alone, how can it be considered fair to the other inner court disciples? Bai Zichen resisted the pressure as he raised his head to look at Feng Manlu and cupped his hands together. The surrounding group of inner academy disciples were all silent. Although they respected Yi Guchen, they didn't feel comfortable that Yi Guchen alone had such qualifications. Only Chu Qingqi Yi Xia and the others didn't care. Instead, they hoped that Yi Guchen would get this opportunity. Yan Wushuang had a complicated expression on her face. She vaguely felt that the gap between her and Yi Guchen had gradually widened. Feng Manlu didn't show any anger after being contradicted by Bai Zichen. Instead, he said indifferently, "You said that Yi Guchen doesn't have the qualifications to obtain this right. Then do you know that the Sword Sect Tower he challenged is the same as the Sword Sect Tower you challenged?" "What do you mean?" All the disciples present were somewhat puzzled when they heard Feng Manlu's words. Only Yan Wushuang's delicate body suddenly trembled, as if she had thought of something. Her beautiful eyes gradually widened. She thought of something. With Yi Guchen's ability to pass through the 8th level, how could his speed be so slow? Since you don't know, I'll tell you. On the 1st level of the Sword Sect Tower, Yi Guchen faced 10 puppets at the 4th transformation. Feng Manlu said, "What? 10 puppets at the 4th transformation? Isn't there a puppet at the 3rd transformation?" Everyone present was in disbelief when they heard Feng Manlu's words. It was as if they had heard something ridiculous. Bai Zichen's face also turned pale. On the 2nd level of the Sword Sect Tower, Yi Guchen faced 20 puppets at the 7th transformation. At the same time, there was also a pressure suppression. On the 3rd level of the Sword Sect Tower, there were 40 puppets at the 8th transformation. Moreover, the pressure was doubled. On the 5th level of the Sword Sect Tower. On the 6th level. On the 7th level. As Feng Manlu spoke. With every sentence he spoke, the shock in everyone's eyes became even more intense. On the other hand, Bai Zichen's face turned even paler. At the same time, Yan Wushuang's feelings were incomparably complicated. Although she had vaguely guessed before, she didn't dare to be sure and wasn't willing to admit this fact. However, these words came from the mouth of Feng Manlu, who she respected the most. Naturally, it couldn't be false. Moreover, with Feng Manlu's status in the Sword Sect Tower, no one would doubt that Feng Manlu was lying. So Yi Guchen's difficulty in challenging the Sword Sect Tower is more than 10 times that of all of you. In this case, do you still think that he doesn't have the qualifications to stay in the Sword Sect Tower? Feng Manlu flicked his sleeves and said indifferently. The entire outside of the Sword Sect Tower was silent. At this point, who still dared to say that Yi Guchen didn't have the qualifications? Even Bai Zichen, who was the first to say that he was unconvinced at the beginning, stood frozen on the spot in a daze. He didn't have the slightest temper. Not only did Yi Guchen break his and Yan Wushuang's record, but it was also 10 times more difficult in the Sword Sect Tower. If it was Bai Zichen or Yan Wushuang, it was hard to say if they could pass the 6th level if the difficulty was 10 times higher. Uncle Feng Shuang are lost, Yan Wushuang muttered in a daze. No matter how thick-skinned she was, she couldn't say that she wanted to compete with Yi Guchen a 3rd time. She was a young girl after all, and she still cared about her face. Don't be discouraged. Continue to work hard. Feng Manlu nodded slightly and turned to enter the Sword Sect Tower. After an entire 15 minutes, the clamor became a boiling cauldron once more. No wonder Sword Sect Yi took so long to pass through the tower. So it turns out that his difficulty is 10 times higher than ours. Oh my god, if it was me, I probably wouldn't even be able to pass through the 3rd level. Many disciples discussed with sighs of admiration. Obviously, Yi Guchen had created another miracle. Yi Guchen had shocked everyone in the 3 great fortuitous encounters. On the other hand, Yan Wushuang and Bai Zichen, who had passed through the 7th level and attracted everyone's attention, were not discussed by many people at this moment. Yan Wushuang shook her head slightly when she saw this scene, and an extremely bitter smile appeared on the corners of her mouth. Shuanger. Ji Ling stepped forward and looked at Yan Wushuang with worry in her beautiful eyes. It's nothing. I'm just a little tired. I'm going to rest. At this moment, Yan Wushuang's voice actually contained a rare trace of exhaustion and weakness, causing others to feel pity for her. On the other side, Bai Zichen left in a daze. No one paid attention to him. With the end of the Sword Sect Tower, the Sword Sect Tower forest returned to its peaceful state. However, because of Yi Guchen, the disciples of the inner courtyard worked even harder in their cultivation, and all of them set Yi Guchen as their goal. Yi Guchen had also been staying on the 8th level of the Sword Sect Tower, comprehending the mystery of the reincarnation Sword Lotus and the union of man and sword. Just when the Sword Sect Tower forest was peaceful, a shocking piece of news shook the entire Saint Origin dynasty like a clap of thunder. The Great Wall of the Great Desolation Mansion had been breached by the Land of Five Elements barbarian tribe. Many elders and disciples of the 7 major forces, including the Great General and the garrison of the Saint Origin dynasty, had all died. Chapter 363. In the inner courtyard of the Sword Sect Pagoda, on a tall mountain peak, an incomparably magnificent and solemn hall was located within. This was the core of the inner courtyard, and also the place where the upper echelons of the Sword Sect Pagoda discussed matters. At this moment, Qing He Gu Tua, Shi Yun and many other elders of the inner courtyard had all appeared in the hall. On a high platform in the middle, the white-robed great elder Qiu Shan sat cross-legged on a praying mat with a solemn expression. How is this possible? The Great Wall of the Desolate Border is not only guarded by the army of the Saint Yuan dynasty, but also many life and death gate elders of the 7 great forces. In addition, there is also the great General Juanzhan of the Desolate Border. He is a divine dwelling stage expert. Elder Qing He's voice was filled with disbelief. The Great Wall of the Desolate Border was located at the border of the Great Desolate Mansion, adjacent to the Land of the Five Elements. Several hundred years ago, a powerful expert had appeared in the barbarian race of the Land of the Five Elements. He had condensed the 5 ancestral totems and was known as the Five-Crown King. At that time, the strength of the barbarian race had reached its peak. Even if the Saint Yuan dynasty and the 7 great forces joined forces, it would still be difficult to deal with the barbarian race. During the critical period of the barbarian race's invasion, the mysterious and powerful Five-Crown King suddenly disappeared without a trace. This caused the barbarian race to be in chaos, which gave the Saint Yuan dynasty and the 7 great forces the opportunity to defeat the barbarian race and drive them back to the Land of the Five Elements. Since then, the Saint Yuan dynasty had built the incomparably magnificent Great Wall of the Desolate Border at the border of the Great Desolate Mansion and the Land of the Five Elements. It was used to resist the barbarian race's invasion for a long time. Not only that, the 7 great forces also had people stationed at the Great Wall of the Desolate Border for a long time. It could be said that the Great Wall of the Desolate Border was the strongest line of defense against the barbarian race. However, news had spread in the past few days that the Great Wall of the Desolate Border had been breached, and the great General Juanzhan, who was stationed at the border, had died in battle. This news was no different from a bolt from the blue, and it shook the entire Saint Yuan dynasty and the 7 great forces. What the hell is going on? That General Juanzhan is an expert of the divine dwelling stage. Even if the barbarian race also has a divine dwelling stage expert, he should be able to escape even if he can't win, another elder said in confusion. The divine dwelling stage was already considered the top experts in the Saint Origin Empire and the surrounding regions. Logically speaking, if such a powerhouse wanted to escape, it would be very difficult to make him stay. Another impressive expert has appeared in the barbarian tribe, Qiu Shan said calmly. What? Could it be another Five-Crown King? The expressions of the many elders below changed upon hearing this. That's not necessarily the case. That expert from the Brute tribe is known as the Heavenly Barbarian King. Although his strength is not as strong as the Five-Crown King from hundreds of years ago, he has also reached the peak of the divine dwelling realm. That's why Feng Zhan did not even have the chance to retreat, Qiu Shan said. If that's the case, I'm afraid only several divine dwelling experts will have a chance to deal with the Heaven Barbarian King. Elder Qing he said thoughtfully. Yes, it's not just the Heaven Barbarian King. There's another young genius in the barbarian tribe. He's called the Four-Crown King. I'm afraid his talent is not much weaker than the Five-Crown King from hundreds of years ago, Qiu Shan said. I heard that the Four-Crown King is extremely arrogant. He even said that he would sweep away all the top heaven prides of the 7 great forces by himself. The ignorant are really fearless, Elder Gu Tuo said with a cold smile. Whether it's the Heaven Barbarian King or the Four-Crown King, we have to treat them with caution. 1/3 of the hundreds of cities in the Great Desolate Prefecture have fallen into the hands of the barbarian race. 7 days later, the 7 great forces will hold an exchange meeting in the Great Desolate Prefecture's northern Liang City to discuss countermeasures against the barbarian race. You should instruct the disciples to get ready, Qiu Shan said. Yes. The many Inner Institute elders gave a cupped fist salute, and then left to make preparations. If the Four-Crown King grows up, he will definitely be a great threat. Among the top heaven prides of the 7 great forces, there are very few who can compete with him, Qiu Shan said with a deep look in his eyes. He suddenly thought of Yi Guqian. Even though he'd always been prejudiced against Yi Guqian, he had no choice but to admit now that Yi Guqian was indeed worthy of being number 1 amongst the inner court disciples of the Sword Sect's Forest of Pagodas, and it was even to the extent that Yan Wushuang was slightly inferior to him. Yi Guqian, will you be able to shock everyone in the fight against the barbarian race this time? Qiu Shan thought to himself. After the meeting, the entire Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was filled with a rare tension. Not only the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, but the entire Saint Origin dynasty, including the 7 great forces, were also mobilized. In the western part of the Saint Origin dynasty, the base of the limitless Sword Sect, Spirit Heaven Mountain, a young man in a black and white Taoist robe was sitting under a lone pine tree on the peak of a mountain. He had long black and white hair that fluttered in the wind. His eyes were like stars and his aura was deep and long. He was the top heaven pride of the limitless sword sect, Xianhao. After the Void Sword Realm, Xianhao had been recuperating, cultivating and calming his mind. Not far away, 2 figures suddenly appeared and walked over slowly. The 2 figures were a man and a woman. The man was dressed in white. He was tall and had a jade-like appearance. The woman was dressed in a black dress. Her face was delicate and charming, bright and charming. Most importantly, this pair of man and woman actually had similar facial features. They were twins of different sexes. Xianhao, it won't be long before we head to the Great Desolation Prefecture, northern Liang City. Don't miss it, the man in white said with a faint smile. Xianhao did not even raise his eyes. Seeing Xianhao's attitude, the woman in the black dress curled her lips and said with a hint of sarcasm, "My brother Feng came here to remind you out of kindness. TSK, didn't the trip to the Void Sword Realm wake you up?" Boom. Just as the woman in the black dress finished her words, Xianhao suddenly opened his eyes and a strong and boundless aura spread out. "Xiandai, how dare you be presumptuous in front of me?" Xianhao said coldly. "Xianhao, I'm afraid it's ungentlemanly to treat a woman like this." The man in white stepped forward and his tone became indifferent. "Brother Feng, I'm so scared." The woman called Xiandai's delicate body was tightly attached to the man in white, but her tone was playful. "Did the failure in the Void Sword Realm give you the confidence to provoke me? I, Xianhao, will accompany you anytime." Xianhao's eyes were as sharp as swords. The man and woman's faces changed slightly, but there was not much fear in their eyes. "Then let's see who can help the sect to win first place in the exchange." The man in white did not say anything more, and left with the woman in the black dress. Xianhao's face turned cold as he looked at their backs. The man and woman were called Xianfeng and Xiandai. They were both supreme talents of the 9 Changes Divine Soul Realm. They had another name in the Saint Origin dynasty, Black and White Impermanence. They were also the most outstanding supreme talents of the Limitless Sword Sect other than Xianhao. Their strength did not lie in their individual strength. Instead, when they worked together, the superimposed strength caused Xianhao to be extremely fearful. However, Xianhao did not see them as competitors. The opponent he recognized was Yi Guqian. "It's a pity that you're already dead. Otherwise, I'd really like to fight with you again in the exchange." Xianhao found it hard to calm down when he thought of the various things that happened in the Void Sword Realm. As a supreme talent, This was the first time he was in such a sorry state, losing repeatedly in the hands of others. However, in Xianhao's eyes, Yi Guchen was already dead. Obviously, a dead person had no value. Xianhao heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time, he felt it was a pity that he had missed an opponent. Yi Guchen is already dead. Then there are not many people who can threaten me. The young war emperor, LV Qinghan and Gu Zun. Xianhao's eyes were deep as he looked into the distance. Chapter 364. In a desolate mountain range in the north of the Saint Origin dynasty, a towering pitch-black city stood there, giving off a domineering aura. This city was where the saber-sealing monarch palace resided. At this moment, a black-clothed youth was sitting on top of a tall building in the city. Around his body, there was a black stream of genuine qi swirling around like black pythons. It looked cold and terrifying. There was a saber on his knees. The saber was pitch black and covered in demonic runes. It looked like it could cut through one's gaze. He was the strongest of the 3 sabers in the saber-sealing monarch palace, Lung Ju. I must take first place in the competition between the 7 forces. It's a pity that Yi Guchen is dead. Otherwise, I would like to experience the feeling of defeating the sword sect with my own hands. Lung Ju's tone was cold and indifferent. At the same time, Lung Ju looked at the other side of the city. There was a mountain with a pitch-black cave on top of it. Gu Zun, you have been in seclusion in the Saber King's ancient cave for an entire year. What are you trying to comprehend? Lung Ju thought. As the strongest of the 3 sabers and the second on the heavenly saber list, he was invincible among the younger generation in the saber-sealing monarch palace. He was only wary of Gu Zun. If Lung Ju was a genius in the saber Dao, then Gu Zun was a genius. Gu Zun's obsession with the saber surprised Lung Ju. Many disciples in the saber-sealing monarch palace even called Gu Zun a madman behind his back. However, they didn't dare to say it out loud. It wasn't just because Gu Zun was strong and ranked first on the heavenly saber list. It was also because of his identity. He was the only direct disciple of Huangdao Yufan. Will you go to this exchange meeting or not? Lung Ju muttered to himself. In the Saber King's ancient cave, it was dark and gloomy. Countless broken sabers filled the entire ancient cave. In the deepest part of the ancient cave, a skinny figure sat quietly with his legs crossed. It was a youth. His hair was messy and his beard was unshaven. His clothes were tattered and emitted an unpleasant smell. His skin was also covered in stains, and there were also many knife marks all over it. In the deepest part of the Saber King's ancient cave, the saber chi in the void was already incomparably sharp. It was not something an ordinary disciple could withstand. However, the saber chi was no longer a threat to the sloppy figure in front of him. In front of the unkempt young man, there was an ancient rusty saber stabbed into the ground. At the same time, there was a simple cut on the wall in front of him. The sloppy youth occasionally looked at the rusty ancient saber, and occasionally looked at the saber mark on the cave wall. He read it for an entire year. For the past year he did not eat or drink. He only consumed spirit pills and spirit pills. The rest of the time, he just stared blankly at the ancient saber and the saber mark. His pitch-black eyes were bloodshot, as if he had been possessed. A peerless saber strike, a peerless saber strike. He muttered as if he had lost his mind. Tap, tap. Following a series of footsteps, a middle-aged man in a golden robe with a slightly aged face walked to the deepest part of the cave, and stared at the sloppy young man who had been sitting with his legs crossed the whole time. Gu Zun, it has already been a year. The middle-aged man let out a sigh. If there were any disciples of the saber-conferred monarch palace here, they would definitely recognize this middle-aged man. He was the vice palace master of the saber-conferred monarch palace, Imperial Saber Yu Bufan. It's not enough. It's still not enough. I have yet to comprehend the peerless saber strike. The sloppy youth named Gu Zun shook his head. This peerless blade, even I have only comprehended 30% of it. Relying on this 30%, I am able to fight evenly with Feng Manlu on the Violet Peak. As for you, Gu Zun, you have already comprehended 50% of it. You are more outstanding than your master. Yu Bufan's eyes were filled with gratification, but also a complicated expression. Gu Zun was his only successor and also the person who would represent him at the Violet Peak. Feng Manlu, the 10-year deadline is approaching. Who will you choose? Yan Wushuang? Yu Bufan thought inwardly. He had thought about Yi Guchen before, but there was news that Yi Guchen had died in the Void Sword realm. As for Bai Zichen, Yuan Mie and the other Sword Dao geniuses, although they were not bad, they had not reached the peak. Therefore, in Yu Bufan's eyes, Feng Manlu's only choice in the entire Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was Yan Wushuang. However, Yu Bufan was confident that Yan Wushuang would not be a match for Gu Zun. Gu Zun was the most suitable person to practice the saber among all the people that Yu Bufan had seen. Gu Zun's obsession and craziness sometimes made Yu Bufan amazed. He believed that there were not many people in the Saint Origin dynasty who were more talented than Gu Zun in the Saber Dao. If the Sword Sect's Yi Guchen was still alive, he might have a chance to fight against Gu Zun. But if it's Yan Wushuang wind-sweeping tower, you've already lost this battle of the Forbidden City. Yu Bufan thought to himself. He shook his head and left, not bothering Gu Zun anymore. After Yu Bufan left, Gu Zun's bloodshot eyes looked at the rusty ancient saber in front of him. He murmured, "Not enough. Still not enough. I need to kill more people to test this saber." Gu Zun murmured. He suddenly stood up, stretched out his hands, grasped the handle of the ancient saber and pulled it out. Rumble. At this moment, the Saber King's ancient cave trembled violently. The terrifying tremors even spread out of the mountain and across the entire Steel City. Bang! Gu Zun roared as he pulled out the ancient rusty blade that even the hall master of the sealed blade monarch hall couldn't pull out. As soon as the ancient saber was drawn out, a terrifying murderous aura burst out like an ancient demonic mountain. If it were an ordinary person, they would have been so scared that they would have collapsed to the ground and their minds would have gone blank. But Gu Zun did not seem to be affected at all. 7 kills. The name of the saber is 7 kills. Gu Zun's hand brushed across the rusty body of the saber. The 2 ancient words 7 kills were engraved on the blade. He carried the saber and walked out of the Saber King's ancient cave. His target was the Great Desolate Mansion, not the so-called exchange meeting in northern Liang City. He decided to go alone to the city that was occupied by the barbarian race. He needed to kill more people to test out his peerless saber. On this day, Gu Zun, who was known as the Saber Maniac, finally left the sealed Saber King Palace after a year of seclusion. He wanted to use the 7 kills ancient saber to test his saber Dao and shake the entire dynasty. In the eastern part of the Saint Origin dynasty, in a valley where flowers bloomed, many exquisite and gorgeous palaces and pavilions stood in the valley, contrasting beautifully with the flowers. This was the residence of one of the 7 major forces, the Consonance Palace. In one of the secluded courtyards, a figure in pink was playing the zither, and the sound of the zither was sorrowful. Her face was beautiful and she was naturally beautiful. At this moment, there was sadness and loneliness in her eyes. She was Zither Fairy. Unknowingly, a beautiful figure in snow-white clothes stood quietly behind Zither Fairy. After a while, Zither Fairy finally noticed. She turned her head and said, "So it's Senior Sister Lu." The woman in front of him was dressed in a snow-white robe. Her skin was as smooth as jade, and she had a natural sense of beauty. It was as if she was a piece of jade that had been meticulously carved by the heavens. She had a head of black hair and a white dress, revealing a classical temperament. She was as cold as smoke. She was like a fairy from the Moon Palace, outstanding and otherworldly. She was the top prodigy of the Consonance Palace, Lu Qinghan. The sound of your zither is sad and sorrowful. It's like you're mourning and it's even filled with longing. Let me guess, is it because of the fallen sword master? LV Qinghan's voice was like a clear spring, and it was extremely pleasant. Senior Sister. The Zither Fairy lowered her head slightly with sorrow in her eyes. It's a pity that I didn't get to see the sword master. I want to see what kind of person he is to make you miss him day and night. But it seems that I don't have the chance anymore. Lu Qinghan shook her head slightly, feeling that it was a pity. If Senior Sister Lu can see Mr. Yi, you will definitely be impressed. The Zither Fairy said. Oh, is that so? My taste is not low. Lu Qinghan raised her brows. Her temperament was indifferent. Although she wasn't an arrogant person, she wasn't someone ordinary people could touch. There were very few people who could make Lu Qinghan, a prodigy, look at them differently. Sigh, it's a pity that the sword master has fallen. Junior sister, listen to senior sister's advice. People have to look forward. It's useless to linger on the past. Lu Qinghan sighed. Hearing that, the Zither fairy's beautiful face became slightly cold. She said, Senior sister, do you want to recommend Zhou Tong to Zither fairy again? Zhou Tong is one of the 3 little kings, the little spiritual king. His strength is only second to the little war emperor. Moreover, his character, temperament, and strength are all excellent. Senior sister's taste won't be wrong. Lu Qinghan smiled faintly. Previously, the Zither fairy said that Lu Qinghan would definitely be impressed by Yi Guchen. Lu Qinghan said that it wasn't certain. But now she approved of Zhou Tong. Obviously, she thought that Yi Guchen could at most be on par with Zhou Tong in all aspects. Thank you for your kindness, senior sister. But Zither fairy doesn't have any feelings for Zhou Tong. The Zither fairy lowered her eyes and said, Sigh, silly junior sister. Senior sister admits that the sword master does have some ability. But thinking about someone who has already passed away will only increase the sadness. That Zhou Tong is very good to you. He even said that he wanted to visit you. Lu Qinghan said. In the past, she had met the little war emperor and Zhou Tong by chance in a secret place. In the end, they found an opportunity together and formed a good relationship. Once, Zhou Tong met the Zither fairy by chance. He couldn't forget her and wanted Lu Qinghan to be the matchmaker. Seeing that the Zither fairy was depressed day by day, Lu Qinghan was also willing to be the matchmaker and help the Zither fairy find new happiness. Senior sister, the Zither fairy is tired. The Zither fairy didn't want to contradict Lu Qinghan, because she knew that Lu Qinghan really cared about her. But how could Lu Qinghan know the position that Yi Guchen had in the Zither fairy's heart? Seeing that the Zither fairy seemed to be dispirited, Lu Qinghan shook her head and said, All right. You should prepare. In a few days, follow me to the northern Liang city to participate in the exchange of the 7 major forces. Zhou Tong and the others will also go. Lu Qinghan thought to herself. At worst, she could matchmake Zhou Tong and the Zither fairy in the northern Liang city. Yes. The Zither fairy nodded faintly. Her mood was still not high. Seeing this, Lu Qinghan didn't say anything. In her opinion, time would eventually erase everything. There would be a day when the Zither fairy would come to terms with it. At that time, she believed that the Zither fairy would accept Zhou Tong's love. Lu Qinghan's figure drifted away like smoke. The Zither fairy's beautiful eyes were bleak, and the sound of her zither sobbed. Young Master Yi, how good would it be if you were still here? As the lotus spun, an unparalleled sword chi seemed capable of tearing apart the world. This was the sword sect's ultimate technique, reincarnation sword lotus. Because Yi Guchen's true chi was golden, the reincarnation sword lotus was also golden in color. However, a moment later, the sword lotus that was rotating in the void suddenly became unstable and shattered into violent sword chi that filled the sky. The sword sect's ultimate technique is indeed not that easy to cultivate. Yi Guchen sighed when he saw this. He had spent a few days on the 8th floor of the sword sect pagoda and consumed another 3 epiphany leaves. However, he could only perform the initial stage of the reincarnation sword lotus. The difficulty of cultivating the sword sect's ultimate technique was no less than that of a Supreme King level sword technique. Most importantly, this was not the complete version of the reincarnation sword lotus. Yi Guchen found it hard to imagine how difficult it was to cultivate the complete version of the reincarnation sword lotus. The current me can only perform 18 leaves of the reincarnation sword lotus at most, and it is not very stable. However, even an incomplete reincarnation sword lotus has 72 leaves. Yi Guchen thought to himself. The more leaves the reincarnation sword lotus had, the stronger its power. The current Yi Guchen could only perform 18 leaves of the reincarnation sword lotus at most. On the other hand, The reincarnation sword lotus that Feng Manlu performed that day had 72 leaves. It seems that cultivating the reincarnation sword lotus is not something that can be accomplished overnight. Now that I've reached the threshold of becoming one with the sword, I've also begun to understand the reincarnation sword lotus. I should leave first, Yi Guchen thought to himself. He did not forget his goal, which was to go to the 5-elemental land to find the sacred herb. Su Jianshur's situation could not be delayed. Yi Guchen left the sword sect pagoda in a flash. After not coming out for a long time, Yi Guchen took a deep breath. He had gained a lot in the sword sect pagoda this time. The embryonic form of the edgeless sword intent had taken shape, and he had also begun to understand the mysteries of becoming one with the sword. He had also learned the reincarnation sword lotus. As for the complete version, Yi Guchen believed that it should be on the 9th floor. However, with Yi Guchen's current cultivation, it was difficult for him to even condense the 72 leaves of the reincarnation sword lotus. Therefore, he was not in a hurry. Yi Guchen left the sword sect pagoda. Along the way, he was surprised to find that the entire inner court seemed empty. Why is there no one here? Yi Guchen frowned slightly. At this moment, an inner court disciple came over. When he saw Yi Guchen, his eyes were filled with surprise. He hurriedly went forward and cupped his hands together. Senior brother Yi, you've finally come out. Yi Guchen looked at the inner court disciple in front of him. He realized that the inner court disciple's attitude towards him seemed to be even more respectful than before. What happened? Yi Guchen asked. It's like this. The inner court disciple recounted the recent news in detail. I see. The barbarian race has already breached the Great Wall of the Desolate Border. The 7 great factions have sent their elders and disciples to the Great Desolate Mansion to participate in the exchange and discuss countermeasures. Yi Guchen thought to himself. Previously, Lord Feng Manlu instructed that no one is to disturb senior brother Yi. He also said that after senior brother comes out of seclusion, if you have nothing else to do, you can ride the Green Sky Eagle to the Great Desolate Mansion's northern Liang City to participate in the exchange. The disciple said respectfully. Yes, I understand. Yi Guchen nodded slightly. Previously, Chu Qingqi had explained it to him. Naturally, he knew the significance of the exchange. If the Limitless Sword Sect or the Saber-conferred King's Palace were to obtain first place again, it would be extremely disadvantageous for the Great Desolate Sect. It would be extremely disadvantageous for the elders and disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Association, and they would have to pay a huge price. As a member of the Sword Sect Pagoda Association, Yi Guchen naturally had to do his part. Moreover, the news of his return had not been leaked. Therefore, Yi Guchen was now a secret trump card that would have unexpected effects. However, before going to the Great Desolate Mansion, I still have somewhere to go. Yi Guchen thought to himself as he found the Green Sky Eagle. Yi Guchen rode the Green Sky Eagle and directly left the Sword Whisper Mountain range. Before going to the Great Desolate Mansion, he still had to go to 2 places. The first place was the Sword Whisper Steel in the Beichen Mansion. Yi Guchen's strength had increased again, and he could enter the Heavenly Path Sword Realm in the Sword Whisper Steel to collect the sky-splitting Sword Soul again. The second place was the Honorable Cave Abode in the Heavenly Wasteland Plains. Yi Guchen knew that this trip to the Great Desolate Mansion was extremely dangerous. Whether it was the threat from the barbarian race's holy sons and holy daughters or the 7 great factions, Yi Guchen had to be vigilant. Moreover, he also had to consider entering the 5 Elements Temple to obtain the sacred elixir. Therefore, Yi Guchen had to increase his strength again to have some assurance. Chapter 366. About a day later, Yi Guchen arrived at the sword-seeking stele of the Beichen Mansion. The sword-seeking stele at the top of the Sky Sword Peak was still in ruins. Coming to this familiar place, Yi Guchen's eyes had a touch of melancholy. He unconsciously thought of Situ Hongxue. He thought of the few days he spent with Situ Hongxue, honing their swordsmanship, hunting demonic beasts, and barbecuing. That was also a rare leisure time for Yi Guchen. But now things had changed. Situ Hongxue disappeared without a trace like a wisp of smoke. In the entire Saint Origin dynasty, There was no news about Situ Hongxue. This woman, who was once famous in the dynasty, seemed to have disappeared from the world. No one mentioned her. But when he thought of the old woman with a high realm beside Situ Hongxue, Yi Guchen felt that Situ Hongxue might have left the Saint Origin dynasty and gone to the wider world of the Nantian region. I don't know if we can meet again. Yi Guchen shook his head slightly and stopped thinking about it. If fate brought them together, they would meet again. If not, then forget about each other. Yi Guchen activated the sequence emblem on the back of his hand and entered the Heavenly Law Sword realm. With his current strength of the Divine Soul 6th transformation, he absorbed another 20,000 sword souls. After absorbing 20,000 sword souls, Yi Guchen felt that his body was bloated, so he stopped. Now there are 30,000 sword souls in my body. As the number of sword souls increases, the power will be greatly enhanced. I will come back for the remaining sword souls in the future. Yi Guchen did not force it. With his current strength, he could only accommodate 30,000 sword souls. After that, Yi Guchen left the sword-seeking steel. After another day, Yi Guchen arrived at the Heavenly Wasteland Plain. Yi Guchen always had a feeling that there was an undiscovered secret in the Heavenly Wasteland Plain. But now, with his current strength, he could not find out anything. Therefore, Yi Guchen did not think too much, and went directly to the venerable cave mansion. Yi Guchen saw the ancient stone forest from afar. In the sky above the stone forest, the 72-leaf reincarnation sword lotus was still spinning. Accompanied by the rotation of the sword lotus, countless sharp and fierce sword qis gushed out without rest. With this method left behind by Feng Manlu, the venerable cave mansion was extremely safe and would not be taken by outsiders. Yi Guchen looked around and found that there was no one around. His figure flashed and directly entered the cave mansion. Yi Guchen had been to the Venerable Immortal's cave twice. The first time he broken with the others. The second time, Yi Guchen entered alone and obtained the Enlightenment Leaf and the Blood Cloud Centipede. However, Yi Guchen knew that the value of a Venerable's cave abode could not be so little. Otherwise, Qiushan would not have been so eager to get Yi Guchen to hand over the cave mansion. When Yi Guchen entered the cave mansion last time, he also found a layer of light barrier in the depths of the cave mansion. Yi Guchen could not break the light barrier with his strength at that time, so he could only give up. But now, Yi Guchen's strength had skyrocketed, so he could give it a try. Soon he arrived in front of the light barrier. Without hesitation, Yi Guchen directly unleashed his strongest combat strength. He brandished the Xianming heavy sword and unleashed the Azura sword intent. He directly performed the first move of the 10,000 God Tribulation, destruction of heaven and earth. The terrifying sword qi gathered at one point, as if it could destroy everything, and directly bombarded the light barrier. This kind of attack was originally very penetrating, and Yi Guchen had already unleashed a powerful strength. As expected, this layer of light trembled violently, and then with a bang, it shattered into countless specks of light. After breaking this layer of light barrier, Yi Guchen entered deeper into the cave mansion. After walking for about 15 minutes, Yi Guchen's footsteps suddenly stopped. The reason for that was because he had discovered a figure standing there silently, emitting a cold murderous aura. Yi Guchen frowned and raised his vigilance to the highest level. In the venerable cave mansion, the slightest negligence could cost one's life. Yi Guchen released his spiritual perception, and to his surprise, the figure did not have a trace of life aura. Yi Guchen's footsteps slowly approached. Only then did he see the figure clearly. The figure was covered in a ferocious blood-red armor. The armor was covered with ferocious thorns, as if it was made of solidified blood, and densely covered the figure's entire body. There was even a layer of armor on the figure's face, making him look like an Azura demon. At the same time, the figure was holding a blood-red longsword in his hand. The edge on one side of the sword was also serrated, like the teeth of a shark. It looked rather murderous and bloody. Whether it was the armor or the sword, there were some cracks all over it, as if it had been greatly damaged. Even so, Yi Guchen could see that the armor and sword were extraordinary, and even seemed like a set of divine weapons. Just as Yi Guchen walked within 100 feet of the figure in the blood-red armor seemed to have awakened. He directly waved the blood-red longsword in his hand and charged at Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's expression changed slightly. The figure in the blood-red armor did not move, but once he moved, his power was monstrous. The blood-red sword light shocked Yi Guchen. Boom! Inside the cave mansion, a great battle unfolded. Yi Guchen burst out with all his strength. He held the Xianming heavy sword and summoned 360 golden sword veins. At the same time, he used the spirit-devouring secret technique, and his strength skyrocketed to the peak of the 9 transformations. Yi Guchen, who had the ultimate sea of qi, no longer had any side effects after using the spirit-devouring secret technique. Therefore, Yi Guchen could use this secret technique at will. God-slaying sword technique Yama. Facing such a powerful figure in the blood-red armor, Yi Guchen did not hold back at all, and directly burst out with his powerful sword move. The boundless blood-red figure rose from the ground behind Yi Guchen, as if it was the Yama of the 9 serenities. A blood-red sword light followed Yi Guchen's sword and swept out. Boom! As the dust scattered, the figure in the blood-red armor did not suffer any damage. Yi Guchen's eyes suddenly flashed. He knew that it was all because of the blood-red armor. Boom! The blood-red armor figure's strength skyrocketed again, directly reaching the life and death challenge realm. Coupled with the defense of the blood-red armor and the offensive power of the blood-red longsword, Yi Guchen immediately fell into a dangerous situation. No, this figure is not a living person but a puppet. Yi Guchen's gaze was like a long sword as he stared at the figure in the blood-red armor. Yi Guchen could not be more familiar with this kind of explosive aura. It was almost the same as the blood cloud centipede. Without hesitation, Yi Guchen directly summoned the blood cloud centipede, and almost squeezed out the last bit of energy from the demonic cloud blood crystal. The blood cloud centipede's strength also skyrocketed to the life and death challenge realm. However, it only lasted for a few dozen breaths. Yi Guchen directly ordered the blood cloud centipede to restrain the figure in the blood-red armor. As for himself, he used wave-like subtle steps, leaving behind afterimages as he circled behind the figure in the blood-red armor. He knew that the blood cloud centipede's energy source was the demonic cloud blood crystal behind its head. Therefore, Yi Guchen planned to use brute force to extract the demonic cloud blood crystal. Rumble! The blood cloud centipede clashed with the figure in the blood-red armor, firmly entangling it. Yi Guchen, on the other hand, attacked the back of the figure's head with his sword. However, the Xianming heavy sword was not sharpened. Therefore, Yi Guchen could only put it away and condense his Zhen Qi into a sword. Seems like I still need a sharpened sword. Yi Guchen thought to himself as he continued to attack. Finally, in the last few breaths of time when the blood cloud centipede's energy was almost exhausted, Yi Guchen seized the opportunity and pried open the mechanism at the back of the figure's head. A translucent crystal with a hazy blood mist swirling around it rolled out with a grunt. The figure in the blood-red armor suddenly froze, as if it was frozen. Yi Guchen's eyes brightened. The demonic cloud blood crystal had not been consumed much. Besides, Yi Guchen was also somewhat interested in the blood armor and the blood-colored longsword. Chapter 367. Yi Guchen had the Xianming heavy sword. However, the Xianming heavy sword was not suitable for all sword techniques. It focused on the ferocious sword momentum that could break 10,000 kilograms. However, Yi Guchen's swordsmanship was not limited to just one type. Therefore, Yi Guchen needed to find another sword. As for forging his own sword, Yi Guchen's current ability was still a little lacking. Moreover, he had not found his innate sword embryo. Yi Guchen had long thought that if he wanted to forge his own famous sword, the innate sword embryo was indispensable. With this demonic cloud blood crystal, the blood cloud centipede can finally be of use. Yi Guchen pressed the demonic cloud blood crystal into the back of the blood cloud centipede's head, and then put the puppet away. He then picked up the blood-colored longsword from the blood-armored figure's hand. After observing it closely, Yi Guchen realized that, although the longsword and the blood armor were full of cracks, there were even finer vein-like patterns all over them. What a strange divine weapon! Yi Guchen wanted to take off the blood armor on the puppet, but found that he could not. Could it be Yi Guchen thought for a moment, and began to investigate carefully. Finally, he found a small array on the back of the armor. Yi Guchen did not hesitate. He extracted a drop of essence blood from his body, and dripped it into the array. At the same time, he also found a small array on the hilt of the blood-colored longsword. He also dripped a drop of essence blood. Suddenly, a stream of information was transmitted into Yi Guchen's mind. As expected, the longsword and armor were the same as the blood cloud puppet. They were products of the Baiming family, one of the 5 overlords of the Nantian region. The blood-colored longsword was called the Blood Prison Sword. The blood-colored armor was called the Heavenly Demon General Armor. And as Yi Guchen expected, they were indeed a set of divine weapons with the same attributes. These 2 divine weapons were both supreme-grade divine weapons with mystical patterns. The only supreme-grade mystical weapon that Yi Guchen had seen before was Jun Xiaoyao's sword, the Heavenly Mandate. But Yi Guchen felt that the quality of the Heavenly Mandate far surpassed these 2 divine weapons. However, when he remembered that Jun Xiaoyao was a genius of the Luofu Sword Pavilion, and one of the top 10 young masters of the Nantian region, he felt relieved. Later on, Yi Guchen also learned from the information that there were several spiritual pattern arrays in the Blood Prison Sword and Heavenly Demon General Armor. However, due to the damage, only one spiritual pattern array called Blood Spirit was useful. The greatest use of this formation was that it could absorb the life force of the enemy after killing them, and use it to repair its own damage. Not only that, but the Blood Spirit array could also transform blood qi into true qi and feed it back to the owner, allowing them to erupt with even more power. Yi Guchen looked at the vein-like patterns on the Blood Hell Sword and Heavenly Demon General Armor, and suddenly understood. It could be said that the Blood Spirit magical array alone made these 2 divine weapons extraordinarily valuable. Although these 2 divine weapons were in a damaged state, as long as they killed more people and absorbed more blood qi, there would be a day when they could be repaired. When they were completely repaired, the power of supreme-grade divine weapons with spiritual patterns could be fully unleashed. Yi Guchen tried to put on the Heavenly Demon General Armor. With a thought, the Heavenly Demon General Armor covered Yi Guchen's body like a living thing, wrapping him up. Shoulder armor, breastplate, arm armor, greaves, and combat boots all appeared. Even Yi Guchen's face was covered with a layer of blood-red armor. At this moment, Yi Guchen was wearing the ferocious Heavenly Demon General Armor, and holding the Blood Hell Sword. He really looked like an Asura from Hell, with a murderous and cold aura. Not bad. Yi Guchen was very satisfied. After putting on the Heavenly Demon General Armor, his appearance was hidden, which was also something he could take advantage of. He waved the Blood Hell Sword in his hand without using a trace of genuine qi, but the sharp blood-red sword light seemed to be about to leave the sword. Even in the forest of 10,000 swords, there won't be a second divine weapon like this other than the Xianming Heavy Sword. Yi Guchen put away the Blood Hell Sword and Heavenly Demon General Armor. He looked around again, but he couldn't find anything else. Yi Guchen went deeper into the venerable cave dwelling, and deeper in, another light curtain appeared. This light curtain was not something Yi Guchen could break with his current cultivation base. It seems that the senior who left behind this cave dwelling is really cautious. He wouldn't give away the opportunity so easily, but this is also good. It will strengthen my determination to break through the life and death threshold. Yi Guchen was not disappointed. Instead, he was determined. He felt that there might be traces of the sacred medicine and the enlightenment ancient tree behind this light curtain. After all, Yi Guchen had already found the enlightenment leaves and branches in this cave dwelling. There was a high possibility that there was an enlightenment ancient tree inside. If he could obtain a complete enlightenment ancient tree, Yi Guchen's comprehension would skyrocket again. His comprehension of various realms, sword intents, sword skills, and so on would also be faster. Therefore, Yi Guchen had to explore the innermost layer in the future. After resting for a while, Yi Guchen also left the venerable cave dwelling. But just as Yi Guchen was about to leave the endless plains, he suddenly thought of a place. The bottomless demon abyss. Yi Guchen's 5-colored golden core was obtained from a mysterious barbarian tribe corpse in the depths of the bottomless demon abyss. Yi Guchen now felt that the barbarian tribe corpse's identity was definitely not ordinary. And with Yi Guchen's current strength and his sea of qi, he could already guarantee that he would be able to explore the bottomless demon abyss again. Not to mention that Yi Guchen's own vigorous genuine qi could block the erosion of the death qi for a long time. He also had a mysterious trump card like the Thunder Tribulation sword that could refine the death qi. Therefore, he was not afraid of the death qi in the bottomless demon abyss. Yi Guchen felt that there must be a big secret inside the bottomless demon abyss. Let's go and explore first. It won't take long anyway. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. He changed direction and flew towards the bottomless demon abyss on the green sky eagle. In just 2 hours, Yi Guchen was about to reach the bottomless demon abyss. He landed directly and asked the green sky eagle to wait in place. Then he approached alone. From a few miles away, Yi Guchen could see the dark death qi that seemed to have covered half of the sky. It was rolling like a black curtain. The death qi in the bottomless demon abyss seemed to be even more turbulent. Yi Guchen's eyes narrowed. Just as he was about to go deeper, he suddenly saw 2 figures in front of him. Their target was also the bottomless demon abyss. There's someone else? Yi Guchen stopped in his tracks. The bottomless demon abyss was a famous forbidden area in the Tianhuang Plain. Almost all the warriors in the Saint Origin dynasty knew about it. Ordinary people couldn't wait to hide. Why would they come here? Yi Guchen could come here because he had the ability to overcome the erosion of the death qi. However, ordinary warriors, even if they had the hidden latch of life and death and the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth, would not dare to explore. Let's wait and see. Yi Guchen did not continue to move forward. He was afraid that there would be more variables. However, what made Yi Guchen's expression change slightly was that the 2 figures seemed to have discovered him and flew towards him at an extremely fast speed. Yi Guchen's expression did not change. He turned around and left. "Brother, please wait." A shout came from the other side. Yi Guchen continued to leave as if he did not hear it. Swoosh. At this moment, a ray of light shot out from the figure in the distance. It expanded in midair and turned into a translucent crystal cover, enveloping Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen furrowed his brows. That person had taken out a divine weapon without any explanation. Wasn't that too overbearing? Yi Guchen stretched out his hand and grasped the air. His true qi condensed into a golden longsword, and he swung it at the crystal cover. Along with a loud explosion, Yi Guchen's expression changed slightly. He found that the cover only trembled a little before it fell down, and enveloped Yi Guchen. "I told you not to leave." The 2 figures arrived. Yi Guchen glanced at them and his eyes narrowed. Chapter 368. Not far away, a man and a woman were walking towards them. The man was about 20 years old, and was wearing a luxurious purple gold robe. His face was handsome, and there was a kind smile on his face. The girl was slightly younger, about 16 or 17 years old. She was also wearing a purplish gold robe, which outlined her delicate body that was in the early stages of puberty. But there was a touch of arrogance on her face. Yi Guchen, who was covered by the crystal cover, stood there indifferently without any change in his expression. Because he had discovered that this crystal cover was a rare treasure. With his current strength, unless he exerted all his strength, it would be difficult to break it. But to reveal all his cards in front of strangers was obviously not a wise thing to do. "I wonder what you 2 want." Yi Guchen's face was indifferent. Not to mention Yi Guchen, if it had been anyone else, they would not have been happy if they had been asked to stay by others in such a way for no reason. "Hey, you really? My brother told you to stop and you kept walking. Now that you are being forced to stay, who is to blame?" The girl in the purple gold robe lifted her chin slightly, showing her arrogance without a doubt. "I don't know you. Do you think I will stop just because you tell me to?" Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows, unable to understand this girl's brain circuit. Could it be that everyone in the world revolved around them? "You stinking brat, if you dare to say another word, I will teach you a lesson today." The girl in the purple gold robe took a step forward, and a peak of the 9 transformations of the divine soul spread out. Yi Guchen's expression did not change, but his heart was slightly surprised. At this age, The 9 transformations of the divine soul? Looking at the 7 forces, the heaven's favorites with the 9 transformations of the divine soul were at least 18 years old. There was no heaven's favorite at this age. And Yi Guqin had never heard of such a heaven's favorite in the 7 forces. Ziyin, don't be too rude. The handsome man on the side pretended to scold her. But there was no hint of blame in his tone. Yi Guqin's expression didn't change as he spoke. Could you remove the cover first? Seeing this, the handsome man smiled and said, Brother, I am Dongfang Hong and this is my sister, Dongfang Ziyun. I see that you have the ability to shake the crystal cloud shield, so you must be extraordinary as well. Therefore, I have something to ask you. The man named Dongfang Hong said with a seemingly amiable smile. However, he still didn't remove the so-called crystal cloud cover. Yi Guqin could also see a trace of hidden contempt in Dongfang Hong's eyes. That was right. It was the kind of disdain that one would give to a lowly being like an ant. Dongfang Hong thought that he had concealed it well, but he couldn't escape Yi Guqin's eyes. I'm sorry, I've never heard of your names, nor do I know who you are. If there's nothing else, please let me go. Yi Guqin frowned slightly. If he used his full strength, it would be enough to break through the crystal cloud barrier. It was just that he didn't want to reveal his trump card in front of these two. But if he was really forced, Yi Guqin wouldn't care so much. TCH, you're really a frog at the bottom of a well. You've never even heard of the Dongfang family. Don't you know that the sun rises from the east? Dongfang Ziyun puffed out her small chest and looked at Yi Guqin with disdain, as if she was looking at a country bumpkin. However, with their background and experience, they did have the right to look down on Yi Guqin. The Dongfang family? Yi Guqin's expression was calm, but his heart was rippling slightly, because the Blood Cloud Puppet, Blood Prison Sword, and Sky Demon General Armor all came from the Baiming family. The Baiming family, the Dongfang family, and the 5 overlord families of the South Horizon region. Yi Guqin quickly connected the dots. Dongfang Ziyun was at the peak of the 9 transformation soul transformation at such a young age, and Dongfang Hong's strength made Yi Guqin feel threatened. He must be at the life and death challenge realm. Such a young life and death challenge realm expert could only be nurtured by the big forces of the South Sky region. Yi Guqin pondered in his heart. But in Dongfang Ziyun's eyes, this scene made him look like he was scared silly. She giggled and said, Big brother, look, this brat is scared silly. Ziyun, don't be rude. Although Dongfang Hong said this, there was a trace of contempt in his eyes. He paused for a moment, then said, My sister and I have always liked to travel around, looking for dangerous places and opportunities. When we passed by the Saint Origin dynasty, we heard that there was a forbidden area called the Bottomless Demon Abyss in the Heaven Wasteland Plain. We were excited and came here. As expected. Yi Guqin's face was expressionless as he thought to himself. He was curious as to why people from big families of the South Sky region would come to the Saint Origin dynasty. However, Yi Guqin didn't completely believe them. He knew that in the eyes of these two, he was just a lowly character in a small dynasty. Since you want to explore, then go ahead. What's the use of keeping me here? Yi Guqin asked indifferently. To be honest, I'm not familiar with the Bottomless Demon Abyss, so I hope you can lead the way for us. Dongfang Hong finally revealed his purpose. Lead the way for them. Yi Guqin looked at Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun. Who did they think they were to ask Yi Guqin to lead the way for them? Moreover, Yi Guqin knew that the so-called leading the way was just a pretense. To put it bluntly, they were using Yi Guqin as a shield to explore the way for them and bear the risk. They would stay behind and act according to the circumstances, looking for opportunities. Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun's attitude must have been the same when they were traveling around dangerous places, forcing others to lead the way. In the end, the ones who died were the others, while the siblings benefited. The Dongfang family. What a great reputation. Unfortunately, I don't know this so-called Dongfang family. Yi Guqin's tone was indifferent. Oh brother, I'm just being kind. After this is done, I can reward you with 100,000 crystal jades. How about it? Aren't you tempted by such a sum of money? Dongfang Hong's tone also turned cold. He slowly took a step forward, and a faint pressure of life and death poured out. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. With his current wealth, 100,000 crystal jades was nothing in his eyes. Dongfang Hong must have thought that Yi Guchen was a rogue cultivator or a disciple of a small family, so he would give him 100,000 crystal jades as charity. However, Yi Guchen deliberately took 2 steps back, pretending to be intimidated by the aura. His face turned pale. He knew that disciples of large families in the South Horizon region like these definitely had many life-saving treasures. Even if he used the blood cloud puppet, it would be difficult to deal with these two in a short time. Therefore, Yi Guchen could only resort to a strategy. Seeing Yi Guchen's pale face and taking a few steps back, Dongfang Ziyun sneered. I already told you to behave yourself. You just had to make Big Brother angry. As she spoke, she looked at Dongfang Hong with admiration. As one of the dominating families in the South Horizon region, the Dongfang family produced countless geniuses. However, Dongfang Ziyun and Dongfang Hong were disciples of the Side family with low status. Among the Side family disciples, Dongfang Hong, who had reached the life and death threshold, was already in the top 3. This was why Dongfang Ziyun admired him so much. In Dongfang Ziyun's eyes, Yi Guchen didn't even have the right to carry Dongfang Hong's shoes. Therefore, Yi Guchen's indifferent attitude towards Dongfang Hong made Dongfang Ziyun very unhappy. Brother, please. Dongfang Hong still had a smile on his face as he removed the crystal cloud barrier. However, he felt a chill in his heart. He had been a Side family disciple of the Dongfang family since young, and had suffered all kinds of humiliation. It wasn't until he revealed his talent and reached the life and death threshold that the Dongfang family started to pay attention to him. Therefore, Dongfang Hong was slightly sick in his heart. He couldn't bear to see others looking down on him. In this small kingdom, Dongfang Hong was confident that he could do whatever he wanted. Even if he met experts, he just had to mention the Dongfang family's name, and they would all treat him politely. However, this youth in front of him treated him with such an attitude. This made Dongfang Hong's heart turn cold. However, because he still needed Yi Guchen as a spy, Dongfang Hong didn't fall out with him. When Yi Guchen slowly walked towards the bottomless demon abyss, Dongfang Hong's smile suddenly froze. He turned his head and asked Dongfang Ziyun. Ziyun, are you sure there's a great opportunity in the bottomless demon abyss? Yes, big brother, don't worry. The treasure-seeking mouse won't make a mistake. However, this treasure-seeking mouse seems to be afraid of the bottomless demon abyss, as if there's something terrifying there. Dongfang Ziyun took out a fist-sized golden mouse. This was a rare demonic beast called the treasure-seeking mouse. Only an overlord family like the Dongfang family could obtain such a rare demonic beast. It's fine. No matter how dangerous it is, with that fellow in front of us, we'll just act according to the situation. Dongfang Hong sneered. Clearly, this wasn't the first time he had done this. That's right. That stinking brat dares to talk back to Big Brother. He's really short-sighted. The ignorant are fearless. Dongfang Ziyun mocked. Chapter 369. Yi Guchen walked in front, while Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun followed behind him. Dongfang Hong was at the life and death threshold, while Dongfang Ziyun was at the pinnacle of the 9 transformations of soul. They didn't believe that Yi Guchen could escape from their control, so they weren't worried and just followed behind. Yi Guchen's face was indifferent. The appearance of the Dongfang family's genius was a wake-up call for him. Perhaps Yi Guchen had already reached the top among the geniuses of the Saint Origin dynasty, and there were very few people who could compete with him. However, the Saint Origin dynasty was just a remote dynasty in the Nantian region. Whether it was the Luofu Sword Pavilion, Gu Xiaoyang Starry Sword Pavilion, or Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun's Dongfang family, they were all top forces in the Nantian region. To put it bluntly, if they wanted to, any one of these forces could easily wipe out the Saint Origin dynasty. Therefore, Yi Guchen didn't have the right to be complacent. However, Yi Guchen had a trace of doubt in his heart. His parents and Aunt Xuansu definitely didn't come from simple backgrounds. Also, what kind of existence was Sky Mountain in the Nantian region? How did it compare to the Starry Sword Pavilion? All of these were mysteries, And only when Yi Guchen stepped onto the stage of the Nantian region would he be able to find some clues. It's useless to think about these now. Let's solve this crisis first. I don't want to experience this kind of thing a second time. Yi Guchen's eyes were cold. He had always been indifferent, and killing people wasn't a big deal to him. It didn't matter if you were from the Dongfang family or not. If you crossed the line in Yi Guchen's heart, he wouldn't show any mercy. Yi Guchen walked to the edge of the bottomless demon abyss, and the rolling death qi was even thicker than before. "Brother, please lead the way," Dongfang Hong said with a fake smile a few dozen feet behind him. Dongfang Ziyun's face was also filled with playfulness, looking at Yi Guchen as if she was looking at a mouse in a cage. Yi Guchen didn't say anything, and directly entered the abyss with his golden true qi wrapped around him. "Heh, I thought this kid was arrogant, but now he's so obedient. People from small places are like this, bullying the weak and fearing the strong." Dongfang Hong shook his head and laughed. He no longer concealed his disdain, and spoke with disdain. "Big brother, let's follow them. If we really find any treasures, we can't let that stinking brat take advantage of us." Dongfang Ziyun was concerned about the treasures in the bottomless abyss. Dongfang Hong and the family. The bottomless all year long. The deeper the death qi of the abyss was, the death realm the qi was. However, Yi Guchen's current strength was no longer the same as before. With his boundless sea of qi, Yi Guchen's true qi would never run out. Therefore, he did not have to worry too much about the corrosion of death energy for the time being. The only thing Yi Guchen was worried about was what existed in the depths of the bottomless abyss. At the same time, Yi Guchen was secretly paying attention to Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun. When they entered the bottomless abyss, they were also surprised by the death qi. They couldn't help but release their true qi to protect themselves. Yi Guchen secretly gauged Dongfang Hong's battle strength. As for Dongfang Ziyun, Yi Guchen wouldn't have paid much attention to her if she didn't have some strange dharma treasures. Yi Guchen had no fear as long as they didn't enter the life and death realm, even if they were at the peak of the 9 transformations. With his current strength, it would be difficult for him to find a match in the divine soul realm. What Yi Guchen cared about the most was Dongfang Hong's strength. Although they were all at the life and death realm, there were differences in strength. Opening the Qi Sea and Mind Sea, allowing them to connect and fuse with the body, was the life and death realm. The initial opening of the life and death realm was called the minor realm. When the Qi Sea and Mind Sea were completely connected and fused, it was called the grand realm. When Gu Xiaoyang, Jun Xiaoyao, and other top geniuses of the Nantian region broke through the life and death realm, they all directly opened the grand realm. People like them were the real geniuses. Dongfang Hong's true qi was vigorous, but it was slightly unstable. It was obvious that he had just broken through the life and death realm. Even in the small hidden entrances, it wasn't very stable. It was because of this that Dongfang Hong was only slightly valued by the Dongfang family. If he could completely open the life and death realm, and achieve the grand realm in one go, even the Dongfang family would treat him seriously and nurture him as a martial arts genius. However, even if it was just the minor realm, his strength was far beyond the 9 transformations. Therefore, Yi Guchen didn't let his guard down. As time passed, Yi Guchen and the Dongfang siblings went deeper and deeper into the bottomless abyss. 500 feet, 700 feet, 10,000 feet. The place Yi Guchen went even deeper than the cave where he obtained the 5-colored golden core, and the ancient jade of the 5 divine beasts. The qi of death here was extremely dense, and the corrosive power was also several times stronger. Even with Yi Guchen's golden true qi, it was still making sizzling sounds. It was very exhausting. Now Yi Guchen was a little relieved. At this place, even a qi sea of 10,000 feet wouldn't be enough. Only a qi sea of 10,000 feet would be able to hold on. At the same time, he also noticed that the Dongfang siblings had already brought out 2 transparent light shields. It wasn't the crystal cloud shield that trapped Yi Guchen before, but a method used to isolate the qi of death. As expected of a big force, such a protective treasure might not be found even in the 7 big forces, Yi Guchen thought to himself. Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun looked at each other in surprise. That kid's true qi is so dense. Dongfang Hong was astonished. Dongfang Ziyun's eyes lit up, and she said in a low voice, "Maybe that stinky kid has some secrets. After we explore this place, we can capture him and force him to tell us what secrets he's hiding." "Ziyun, you're really smart," Dongfang Hong praised. "I learned it from you, big brother." Dongfang Ziyun smiled with her eyes narrowed. Below the demonic abyss, Yi Guchen's lips curled up in a cold smile. The range of his divine soul was 200 feet, and with the qi of death here, Yi Guchen's divine soul fluctuations were even more concealed. Therefore, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun didn't realize that their conversation had been heard by Yi Guchen. "You're going too far." Yi Guchen's eyes were as cold as swords. Dongfang Ziyun looked delicate and beautiful, but her heart was so sinister. Moreover, she had already touched Yi Guchen's bottom line. "If that's the case, then I will accompany you to the end." Yi Guchen suddenly let go of the hand that was holding the cliff. His body fell into the depths like an arrow. Above, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun's expressions changed at the same time. They gritted their teeth and fell down together. 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 5,000 feet. In the end, Yi Guchen didn't know how deep he had fallen, but he vaguely sensed the ground. He tapped the cliff again and landed steadily. As soon as his feet touched the ground, there was a series of cracking sounds. Yi Guchen looked down and focused his eyes. The ground beneath his feet was covered in countless white bones. He looked at the bottom of the demonic abyss. As far as the eye could see, there were white bones everywhere. At the end of the endless white bones, a pitch-black demonic city stood there with an ancient and desolate aura. At the bottom of the demonic abyss, there was a land of white bones and an ancient demonic city. Chapter 370. The scene in front of him was shocking and frightening. The deepest part of the bottomless demon abyss seemed to have been hollowed out. Countless white bones covered the white land. On the ground, there was a dark demon city that seemed to have been standing since ancient times, with a primitive and barbaric aura. In the bottomless demon abyss, the surging deathly aura that could devour life came from the demon city. Danger. Extreme danger. Yi Guchen's eyes were filled with shock. He was a cold and indifferent person, and he did not know what fear was. However, the demon city in front of him gave him a sense of extreme danger. This sense of danger surpassed all the dangers that Yi Guchen had encountered before. It was as if there was a taboo in the demon city. At this moment, Yi Guchen suddenly realized that the immemorial sword token in his origin ring had a reaction, and started to tremble slightly. Immemorial sword token, could it be? Yi Guchen's face suddenly froze and an intense light burst out from his eyes. With his personality, it was rare for him to be agitated or lose his composure. However, Yi Guchen was unable to calm down. This was because he knew that the immemorial sword token was closely related to the famed immemorial swords. In the immemorial sword record, there were 108 divine swords on the heaven and earth lists. They were the strongest divine weapons in the world. Above the South Sky region, the Celestial Emperor Sword, which was ranked 14th on the heaven list, had replaced the blazing sun and bright moon to illuminate the land. A sword that could illuminate the vast land showed how powerful it was. Even if it was a famed sword on the earth list, even if it was slightly weaker than the famed sword on the heaven list, it was still a rare and precious divine weapon. It could be said that the famed immemorial swords were rare. Although mysterious fires and mysterious thunders were rare, they were nothing compared to the famed immemorial swords. Their value was not on the same level. The famed immemorial swords were priceless. Although my ambition is to create a famed sword that belongs to me, I will have no regrets if I can obtain a famed immemorial sword, Yi Guchen thought to himself. A famed ancient sword was the ultimate dream of all sword cultivators. Yi Guchen was no exception. It could be said that if this news were to spread out, the entire South Horizon region would be in an uproar. None of the top forces would be able to sit still. Could it be that the primordial sword is in this demon city? But I only have one primordial sword token. The Situ family has 2 primordial sword tokens. The other one was taken away by Prince Yuanyi. Yi Guchen thought to himself. Clearly, there were more than just these few immemorial sword tokens. Yi Guchen only had one on him. Although there was a reaction now, it obviously wouldn't change anything. Tsk, I didn't expect there to be such a magnificent demon city in the bottomless demon abyss. Dongfang Heng's voice came from behind. Dongfang Ziyun's face was also filled with shock as she looked at the shocking scene in front of her. However, she turned to look at Yi Guchen and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She pouted and looked at Yi Guchen playfully. "Stinking brat, you sure run fast," said Dongfang Ziyun. A dark light flashed in Yi Guchen's eyes. Fortunately, the Dongfang siblings didn't have any immemorial sword tokens. Otherwise, if they sensed the strange reaction of the immemorial sword token, they would suspect that this demon city was related to the primordial sword. "Ziyun, what are you talking about? I don't think this brother wants to run away. He's in a hurry to show us the way." Dongfang Heng laughed. He was in a good mood to be able to find such a secret place. However, his words seemed to be hinting at something. Obviously, the deeper meaning was to tell Yi Guchen to be honest and not play any tricks. Yi Guchen didn't say anything. His expression was calm. Seeing this, Dongfang Heng directly said, "Brother, please lead the way into the city." The Eternal Devil City was filled with an aura of death. Even though it was a mysterious place, anyone who laid eyes on it would think that it was a place of great danger. Therefore, Dongfang Heng asked Yi Guchen to lead the way. Yi Guchen looked at Dongfang Heng deeply and didn't say anything. He slowly walked into the demon city. Dongfang Heng and Dongfang Ziyun followed behind. The closer they got to the demon city, the stronger the death qi became. Even a divine dwelling expert wouldn't be able to withstand it for too long. Even the qi shield released by Yi Guchen's qi si was extremely unstable. From time to time, the death qi would corrode the shield and directly invade it. Fortunately, Yi Guchen had the Thunder Tribulation sword in his body, which could eliminate the death qi. As for Dongfang Heng and Dongfang Ziyun, their protective light shield was obviously a rare treasure of the Dongfang family. Although it had dimmed a lot under the suppression of the death qi, it could still hold on for a while. Well, this is. Yi Guchen suddenly looked down. Among the eerie white bones, a broken halberd was flashing. Just as he was about to reach out to examine it, a ray of qi shot directly to the ground. Yi Guchen's hand paused. "Brother, wait a moment. Let me take a look at it." Dongfang Heng stepped forward with a smile and picked up the broken halberd. After taking a closer look, he instantly revealed a look of surprise. "This material is a rare treasure, golden jade." Dongfang Heng's face lit up with joy. Although the broken halberd couldn't be used, it was made of the rare golden jade, which could be melted down and reforged. Yi Guchen didn't say anything and continued walking forward. A few moments later, Yi Guchen found another broken weapon. "Brat, don't touch it." Dongfang Ziyun ignored Yi Guchen and picked up the weapon. "It's also a rare material." Dongfang Ziyun's face was filled with a happy smile. It was obvious that these weapons were left behind by experts who had died here. Therefore, none of them were ordinary. Although they were all broken, the value of the materials was extremely high. Next, Yi Guchen found a few more weapons. Although Yi Guchen was the first to discover these weapons, Dongfang Heng and Dongfang Ziyun stepped forward and collected them with smiles on their faces. Even in the Dongfang family, it would take a lot of wealth to obtain these rare materials. Moreover, this was only the outskirts of the demon city. They hadn't truly entered the demon city. In the face of the Dongfang siblings' forceful looting, Yi Guchen's expression was cold, and he didn't say anything. After a while, Yi Guchen really did approach the demon city. The closer he got, the more Yi Guchen felt the demon city's aura. It was like the aura of a primordial beast. Endless pitch-black death qi surged out of the demon city. At this place, if Yi Guchen didn't have the lightning tribulation sword in his body, he would have been completely devoured by the death qi in an instant. Even Dongfang Heng and Dongfang Ziyun's protective barrier dimmed, and wouldn't be able to hold on for too long. But looking at the excitement in Dongfang Heng and Dongfang Ziyun's eyes, it was obvious that they wouldn't stop here. Yes, in front is. Yi Guchen looked over. To his surprise, he discovered that there were many figures standing stiffly outside the Devil City. Those figures didn't have the slightest bit of vitality, and their skin was deathly gray. but the faint remnant aura made Yi Guchen's face freeze. Evidently, these were all experts of the past who had ultimately fallen here. He thought of the living corpse with the 5-colored golden core. The figures in front of him were obviously devoured by the death chi like that living corpse. And Yi Guchen knew that if he got too close and provoked these living corpses, they would attack him directly. Yi Guchen thought to himself and stopped in his tracks. Dongfang Hong saw this and said with a smile, "Brother, why did you stop? We can't go any further." "I'm afraid it's dangerous," Yi Guchen said. "Oh, I don't see any danger." Dongfang Hong's tone turned cold. "You don't see those figures?" Yi Guchen frowned slightly. If those living corpses were provoked, Yi Guchen and the others wouldn't be able to resist their strength. "It's just some dead corpses." "Brother, don't tell me you're afraid of that." Dongfang Hong's tone was slightly impatient. "Just go when I tell you to go. Why are you talking so much nonsense?" Dongfang Ziyan didn't hold back at all. Yi Guchen's expression didn't change. He walked forward and thought of a solution. When Yi Guchen was only 100 feet away from the living corpses, his soul perception vaguely sensed that some of the living corpses seemed to tremble slightly. Yi Guchen's footsteps suddenly stopped, and then he rushed to the other side. The Dongfang siblings' expressions changed. Just as they were about to attack, they saw that the originally motionless living corpses woke up one by one. They let out hoarse roars and rushed toward Yi Guchen and the Dongfang siblings. Chapter 371. The Dongfang siblings' expressions changed drastically when they saw the living corpses charging at them. Yi Guchen had experienced this kind of thing before, so it was within his expectations. However, the Dongfang siblings were not aware of this. "Damn it! You knew about this." Dongfang Hong was so angry that he did not try to hide his anger anymore. His tone was as cold as ice. "I told you to stop, but you didn't listen. Now that the living corpses have been stirred up, who's to blame?" Yi Guchen said coldly, his eyes as cold as ice. Without hesitation, he dashed toward the periphery. Putting aside the fact that there were no traces of the primordial sword in the ancient demon city, Yi Guchen was not allowed to investigate in this dangerous situation. The only thing that caught Yi Guchen's attention was that the primordial sword token in his origin ring was vibrating. "Do you think you can escape? You've offended the Dongfang family. Even if you were the crown prince of this dynasty, I could kill you at will, let alone a divine soul realm martial cultivator." Seeing that he had been fooled by Yi Guchen, Dongfang Hong no longer tried to hide his feelings. His tone was cold and arrogant as he judged Yi Guchen's life and death. At the same time, he and Dongfang Ziyan retreated quickly, hoping to leave this place first. Kill. Who's the one killing who? Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. He took out the Xianming heavy sword and slashed it horizontally. A fierce 1,000-layer sword wave spread out with a loud bang. With Yi Guchen as the center, the white bones on the ground were crushed into powder by the shockwave. The shockwave continued to blast toward Dongfang Hong and the others. "How dare you be so presumptuous in front of me, a mere divine soul realm martial cultivator?" Dongfang Hong threw out his palm. His terrifying genuine chi turned into a palm print and destroyed the sword wave. Then, Dongfang Hong took out the crystal cloud shield again and tried to envelop Yi Guchen. Previously, Yi Guchen was trapped by the crystal cloud cover, so Dongfang Hong was confident that he could trap Yi Guchen. Then he would use Yi Guchen to stall the living corpses, allowing him and Dongfang Ziyun to escape. "Are you going to use this move again?" Yi Guchen smiled coldly. He directly activated the vermilion bird totem on his chest. The power of the flame totem was directly transmitted to Yi Guchen's back. Then a pair of incomparably gorgeous fire wings suddenly spread out. Yi Guchen flapped his wings and shot out like an arrow, dodging the crystal cloud cover. Hidden gate of life and death. Seeing the fire wings on Yi Guchen's back, Dongfang Ziyun instinctively screamed. "No, that should be some kind of secret technique. This brat really knows how to hide his strength." Dongfang Hong's face turned slightly ugly. However, he could not let Yi Guchen leave just like that. Divine Violet Sun Palm. Dongfang Hong's cultivation of the small mortal gate erupted. boundless true qi surged out and turned into a giant purple hand, suppressing Yi Guqin in front of him. The divine violet sun palm was a king-level martial art of the Dongfang family. Using it with Dongfang Hong's cultivation, its power was not to be underestimated. Even Yi Guqin's expression changed slightly. That giant purple hand seemed to have the ability to lock down and suppress, slowing down Yi Guqin quite a bit. "You'll die here," Dongfang Hong sneered. The true qi wings on his back unfolded. Then he hugged Dongfang Ziyun's waist and directly overtook Yi Guqin. However, at this critical moment, he did not have the time to personally kill Yi Guqin. Roar! Behind them, more than 10 living corpses rushed over. Their aura was terrifying. One could imagine that these living corpses were supreme experts when they were alive. After they died, they were transformed into powerful demonic corpse puppets by the death qi. Yi Guqin used the Xianming heavy sword and the boundless heaven sword art to defeat the giant purple hand. However, the demonic corpse puppets had already rushed over. Yi Guqin's expression turned serious. The demonic corpse puppets from before had almost killed Yi Guqin. Now more than 10 demonic corpse puppets were surrounding Yi Guqin. Even if Yi Guqin wanted to use the power of the lightning tribulation sword, he could not deal with more than 10 demonic corpse puppets at the same time. "Big brother, that brat is finished." Not far ahead, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyan looked back and sneered when they saw Yi Guqin surrounded by the demonic corpse puppets. They did not feel the slightest bit of guilt or pity. This was what they did when they entered any secret place before. They forced the ordinary warriors to explore the way. Even if they died, they did not feel anything. It was as if those people's lives were not lives. Only the lives of the two of them were the most precious. This brat knew the situation here, and pretended not to know. "This is the price he has to pay," Dongfang Hong said coldly. "I'm afraid this brat is already regretting it." Dongfang Ziyan giggled. On the other side, Yi Guqin, who was surrounded by the demonic corpse puppets, was facing a life-and-death crisis. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. Without hesitation, Yi Guqin took out the pitch-black immemorial sword token from his origin ring. Yi Guqin held the immemorial sword token and stared at the demonic corpse puppets around him. The immemorial sword token was still trembling, as if it had some kind of connection with the Eternal Demon City. At this moment, a roar suddenly came from the Eternal Demon City. The roar seemed to have come from the primordial times and shook the entire land of bones. Even Yi Guqin's sea of consciousness was trembling violently, as if it could not withstand the roar. After the roar, the demonic corpse puppets glanced at Yi Guqin with their dead gray eyes, then turned and charged toward Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun. This scene made Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun, who were watching from a distance, turn pale instantly. It was as if they had seen a ghost. "How is this possible?" Dongfang Hong shouted, his face pale. He had thought that Yi Guqin would be killed by the demonic corpse puppets, but now that Yi Guqin was fine, the demonic corpse puppets were chasing after them. "Damn it, this brat must have been here. The token in his hand must be some kind of token. He has been playing with us." Dongfang Ziyun's face was red with anger, her chest heaving up and down. In their eyes, Yi Guqin obviously knew the situation here, but he pretended not to know and framed them. However, Yi Guqin had never taken the initiative to frame the Dongfang siblings. They had gone too far and touched Yi Guqin's bottom line. But now, the situation had reversed. "Let's go." Dongfang Hong hugged Dongfang Ziyun, and desperately wanted to escape. He knew that although he had the cultivation of the minor profound martial realm, he wouldn't be able to last more than a few rounds against the demonic corpse puppets. "You want to leave now?" Yi Guqin's lips curled into a playful smile. The Dongfang siblings had repeatedly touched his bottom line, and had even secretly decided to force out his secrets. How could Yi Guqin let such people go? In the next moment, Yi Guqin took out the blood prison sword and heavenly demon general armor. The blood-red armor wrapped Yi Guqin's body tightly, and the malevolent thorns that extended out made Yi Guqin's figure appear even colder and more austere. He held the blood prison sword in his hand, and flapped the vermilion bird wings on his back, as he charged toward the Dongfang siblings. Not far away, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun felt Yi Guqin's change, and turned back to look. Their eyes instantly froze. Damn it, you're actually from the Baiming family. Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun's eyes were filled with shock as they roared. Chapter 372. The Blood Prison Sword and Sky Demon General Armor were both products of the Baiming family. The Dongfang family and the Baiming family had a feud. As the saying went, know thyself and know thy enemy. Both families had a good understanding of their opponents. That was why Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun could recognize Yi Guqin's Blood Prison Sword and Sky Demon General Armor at a glance. Damn it, no wonder you're so vicious and set us up. Even in the Baiming family, only the core members of the family can obtain the Blood Prison Sword and Sky Demon General Armor. Who are you? Dongfang Hong roared as he ran for his life. If he had faced Yi Guqin alone, he would not have run. He would have even killed Yi Guqin along the way to obtain the family's merits. Yi Guqin must be a core member of the Baiming family, who possessed these two divine weapons. He must have a high status. If he could kill such a member of the family, it would be a great contribution. Even the direct descendants of the family would look at Dongfang Hong differently because of this. But with more than 10 demonic corpse puppets chasing after him, Dongfang Hong had no chance at all. I don't believe that the Baiming family will stay here forever. Once I escape, I'll wait outside and kill this person. Dongfang Hong thought to himself as he exchanged glances with Dongfang Ziyun. The two of them understood each other and had a tacit understanding. Yi Guqin, who was behind them, did not know about this. However, from Dongfang Hong's furious tone, he could guess that the Dongfang family and the Baiming family, these two hegemonic families, seemed to be in a hostile relationship. Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun clearly misunderstood him and thought that Yi Guqin was a member of the Baiming family. They also thought that everything before them was Yi Guqin's scheme against them. But Yi Guqin did not care about this. Whether or not they misunderstood, this enmity had already been formed, and there was no way to resolve it. I have to make them stay. Yi Guqin's eyes were cold. He poured his true qi into the Blood Prison Sword. In a split second, the originally cracked and dim Blood Prison Sword exploded with a sharp sword light that sent chills down one's spine. God-slaying sword technique, yellow springs. Yi Guqin slashed out with his sword, and a terrifying sword qi transformed into a blood-red sword river that surged toward the Dongfang siblings. His sword wasn't meant to kill the Dongfang siblings. After all, Dongfang Hong was in the minor profound martial realm, so it wouldn't be easy for him to kill him. What Yi Guqin wanted was to block the attack. Delay Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun, then let the demonic corpse puppets kill them. This is the god-slaying sword technique. The Baiming clan is indeed treacherous. Dongfang Hongjian sensed the sword river coming from behind him. He turned around and struck out with his palm, destroying the sword river. Originally, they had misunderstood Yi Guqin, but after Yi Guqin displayed the god-killing sword technique, they were even more convinced of Yi Guqin's identity. This was because the god-slaying sword technique was the king-level sword technique of the Baiming family. However, although Dongfang Hong blocked Yi Guqin's sword with his palm, his speed was slowed down a little. The demonic corpse puppet behind him was almost catching up with him. However, Yi Guqin's expression was indifferent as he continued to attack. He also realized that the Blood Prison Sword had a slight effect on the God-slaying sword technique. But when he thought about the possibility that the God-slaying sword technique was also a sword technique of the Baiming clan, Yi Guqin felt relieved. Damn it. Dongfang Hong's face was ashen, and he was so angry that his heart was about to explode. Originally, with his cultivation and strength, he didn't need to expend much effort to deal with Yi Guqin. But in this situation, he could only passively defend. He didn't dare to stop to deal with Yi Guqin. Damn it, when I escape, I'll cut you into 1,000 pieces. Dongfang Hong was furious. Dongfang Hong could only watch as Yi Guqin attacked him without being able to retaliate. This made him feel extremely aggrieved. It was as disgusting as eating a fly. Ah, you didn't care about my life at all before. Now that your own life is threatened, you're flustered and exasperated? Yi Guqin's voice was as cold as water. The sea of qi in his body expanded, and his true qi surged into the Blood Prison Sword. Yi Guqin activated the Blood Spirit Array, and displayed the fifth form of the god-slaying sword technique, Yama. Boom. The blood-red figure of Yama rose from behind Yiguchen, and a terrifying murderous aura surged out. Ah. You actually mastered the fifth form of the god-slaying sword technique. Do you know that move? Dongfang Hong's eyes suddenly showed a trace of fear. There were many king-level sword principles in the Baiming family. 2 of them could be used in combination. The power of the combined sword technique was comparable to an emperor-level sword technique. The god-slaying sword technique was one of the 2 sword techniques that could be combined. The requirement was that one had to at least master the fifth form. That was why Dongfang Hong was so shocked when he saw Yiguchen display Yama. If Yiguchen had really displayed the emperor-level sword technique, even with Dongfang Hong's cultivation, he might have been seriously injured or even killed. What is he saying? Yiguchen frowned slightly. He was not a member of the Baiming clan, so he naturally did not know the reason. However, Yiguchen was very smart. From Dongfang Hong's words, he could tell that the god-slaying sword technique seemed to be hiding some secrets. However, at this juncture, Yiguchen did not have the luxury of time to think too much. He directly attacked with his sword. With the enhancement of the blood spirit array, the sword was extremely powerful. The terrifying blood-red sword radiance, which was dozens of feet long, slashed toward Dongfang Hong as if it could split the sky. Dongfang Hong's expression changed abruptly. He immediately took out a life-saving treasure to block Yiguchen's powerful sword. This was because he did not have the time to block Yiguchen's sword. Then Yiguchen continued to attack with his sword. In order to escape, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun could only take out their treasures to block Yiguchen's attacks. Dongfang Hong's face was as black as the bottom of a pot, and the veins on his temples were throbbing. Dongfang Ziyun's face was even more ghastly. She cried, "Brother, I almost lost all my treasures." The Dongfang siblings were extremely angry. Although the materials they had taken from Yiguchen were precious, they could not compare to the treasures they had just taken out. This time, they had suffered a double loss. Roar! Behind them, the demonic corpse puppet finally caught up. It threw out a punch, and the fierce fist wind almost tore the space apart as it charged toward the Dongfang siblings. Boom! Dongfang Hong once again took out his last life-saving treasure. His origin ring was now empty. He had already thrown out most of his life-saving treasures. However, they were almost at the cliff. As long as they climbed up, they would be able to shake off the demonic corpse puppet's attacks. We're finally about to escape. When the time comes, I'll definitely contact my clansmen and have you, a member of the Dark North clan, executed. Dongfang Hong's tone was filled with hatred. Behind them, Yiguchen's expression was as cold as ice. His energy sea spun rapidly. Terrifying sword chi gushed out from his back, transforming into a pair of sword wings that were dozens of feet long. 10,000 God tribulation, destruction of heaven and earth. Yiguchen slashed out with his sword. Violent sword chi surged like a river for thousands of miles. The majestic sword chi instantly condensed into a point and shot toward Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun. No! Dongfang Hong's eyes finally revealed a look of terror. Even Dongfang Hong, who was born in the Dongfang family, was extremely shocked in the face of a supreme sword technique like the 10,000 God tribulation. He had already taken out all his life-saving treasures. If he did not attack, he would be hit by the sword. If he attacked, he would be delayed and surrounded by the demonic corpse puppets. Either way, he would be dead. In the next moment, Dongfang Hong's gaze suddenly fell on Dongfang Ziyun. Just as he was struggling with a decision, Dongfang Ziyun gritted her teeth. Dongfang Ziyun suddenly gritted her teeth. Vigorous true chi poured into her white jade-like palm and fiercely slapped towards Dongfang Hong's chest. "Sorry, brother." Dongfang Ziyun's eyes were cold. Chapter 373. Bang. Although Dongfang Ziyun's cultivation hadn't reached the life and death chamber, she had poured all of her true chi into this attack. She was caught off guard and hit Dongfang Hong's chest. Dongfang Hong, who was at the life and death chamber, spat out a mouthful of blood and flew backwards. Dongfang Ziyun took the opportunity to break free from Dongfang Hong's embrace and dashed forward. Ziyunyu. Dongfang Hong's eyes were filled with shock, disbelief, confusion, anger, and many other emotions. I learned all of this from you, big brother. Dongfang Ziyun glanced at Dongfang Hong one last time, then took out a talisman paper from her origin ring and stuck it on her body. In the next moment, the talisman paper shone brightly, and Dongfang Ziyun's speed increased tenfold. You actually have another wind walk talisman. Dongfang Hong laughed bitterly, his eyes full of regret. Just now, the thought of sacrificing Dongfang Ziyun flashed across his mind. However, he hesitated and couldn't do it. In his eyes, he thought Dongfang Ziyun was sincere towards him. In the next moment, he was sacrificed by Dongfang Ziyun. Not only that, Dongfang Ziyun had secretly left a windwalk talisman behind. She didn't use it to escape, as she was afraid that Dongfang Hong would take it away. She wanted to use it at a critical moment. As for the so-called sibling relationship, it was fake. They weren't blood-related siblings, but only cousins. In a few breaths' time, the demonic corpse puppets had caught up and punched at him. Dongfang Hong couldn't resist at all. He screamed as his body was penetrated by the demonic corpse puppets' fists, creating dozens of bloody holes. His entire body was like a sieve, bleeding nonstop. Damn it, I'm the pride of the Dongfang family. To think that I'll die here. Dongfang Hong's mouth kept bleeding, his eyes full of regret. Unfortunately, it was too late to mend the pen after the sheep was lost. Yi Guchen didn't show any mercy when he saw this. He directly charged at Dongfang Hong with the blood hell sword in hand. Dongfang Hong saw this and roared, "Sinister Biming family, if you kill me, the Dongfang family will hunt you down to the ends of the earth." Yi Guchen was unperturbed. He was least afraid of threats. The sharp blood-red sword Qi tore Dongfang Hong's body apart. The blood mist was absorbed by the blood hell sword and the heavenly demon general armor, and the blood-red light on the surface became even thicker. The blood spirit spell formation was immediately activated, and began to absorb the blood qi to slowly repair the two divine weapons. An expert of the minor Xian Gate would have an incomparably dense life force, which would be of great help to the repair of the two divine weapons. Dongfang Ziyun escaped. Yi Guchen frowned slightly. His soul could reach a range of 600 meters, but he was unable to sense Dongfang Ziyun's presence within that range. It was clear that Dongfang Ziyun had already fled far away. With her windwalk talisman, she was most likely heading for the exit of the bottomless devil abyss. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. He didn't choose to chase after Dongfang Ziyun. Instead, he went to find the crystal cloud barrier. After Dongfang Hong's death, the crystal cloud cover became an ownerless item. Yi Guchen had used his blood essence to refine the crystal cloud cover into his own treasure. Although the crystal cloud cover didn't have any offensive capabilities, it could be used to restrain enemies or protect oneself. Even ordinary life and death chamber experts might not be able to shatter the crystal cloud cover in a short period of time. Yi Guchen was confident that he could shatter it because he had mastered the 10,000 God Tribulation and Heaven Annihilation. After putting away the crystal cloud cover, Yi Guchen glanced at the Eternal Devil City. He didn't hesitate and directly left. The current him didn't have the ability to explore the secrets of this place. Moreover, Yi Guchen couldn't guarantee that the immemorial sword token would be able to protect him forever. Moreover, Yi Guchen guessed that if he wanted to know the secrets of this place, the most basic requirement was to collect all the immemorial sword tokens. After thinking for a while, Yi Guchen directly left the bottomless devil abyss. He would come back to explore the secrets of this place when he had the ability in the future. Not long after, Yi Guchen walked out of the bottomless devil abyss. Seeing the light of day again, Yi Guchen let out a sigh of relief. The episode this time could be said to be a little thrilling. If he didn't have the immemorial sword token, Yi Guchen shook his head slightly and stopped thinking about it. However, what made him frown was that there was no trace of Dongfang Ziyun leaving. Yi Guchen couldn't even determine which direction Dongfang Ziyun had fled in. Clearly, Dongfang Ziyun was very careful and didn't leave any trace behind. Yi Guchen's eyes were deep. It seemed that even he had misjudged her. That seemingly arrogant girl was actually ruthless and scheming, far surpassing Dongfang Hong. Dongfang Ziyun's escape is a hidden danger. Fortunately, she mistakenly thought that I was from the Baiming family, so she shouldn't target the Saint Origin dynasty for now. Moreover, she doesn't know my name. Yi Guchen thought. Although Dongfang Ziyun had escaped with her life, Yi Guchen didn't have to worry too much about the Dongfang family's revenge in the short term. If it was delayed, Yi Guchen might not even be in the Saint Origin dynasty. Therefore, Yi Guchen didn't worry too much. He directly left the bottomless devil abyss, found the azure sky eagle waiting outside, and set off for the great desolate mansion. At the same time, hundreds of miles away from the bottomless devil abyss, Dongfang Ziyun, who was wearing a purple gold robe, stopped and panted. The wind-walk talisman on her body had also turned to dust. It was obviously a one-time use treasure. Damn it. It wasn't easy to find Dongfang Hong and follow him to search for treasures. Compared to the side family, my progress was much faster. But now it's all ruined by that stinking brat. Dongfang Ziyun's eyes were cold. Her respect and admiration for Dongfang Hong was just an act. With her status, she had to rely on someone with a higher cultivation base and status. As one of the top 3 prodigies in the Dongfang family's side family, Dongfang Hong naturally had the right to rely on Dongfang Ziyun. Dongfang Ziyun had already known that Dongfang Hong intended to sacrifice her, but she was hesitant. Dongfang Ziyun decided to make the first move to gain a chance of survival for herself. Big brother, don't blame me. I've learned a lot from you. But don't worry, I won't let that stinking brat go. Dongfang Ziyun's beautiful eyes flashed with a sinister light. She decided to spread the news to the Dongfang family's main branch. Although she had indirectly killed Dongfang Hong, she could push the blame to the Baiming family. At the same time, Dongfang Ziyun planned to contact the strongest prodigy in the side family, Dongfang Shiri. No matter what, Dongfang Hong was still one of the top 3 prodigies in the side family. As the top prodigy, Dongfang Shiri definitely wouldn't just stand by and watch. If I spread the news to the main branch, I'll be rewarded. Then, I'll tell Dongfang Shiri that I can build a relationship with him. His talent and resources are much better than Dongfang Hong's. Dongfang Ziyun smiled faintly. Although she had suffered a setback this time, it was a blessing in disguise. With Dongfang Shiri's temper, he'll definitely come to the Saint Origin dynasty. His talent and strength aren't any weaker than those prodigies in the main branch. I've already memorized the appearance of that Baiming family member. As long as I search carefully, he won't be able to escape. At that time, I'll be able to get a share of the credit and rise to the top. When Dongfang Shiri comes, that Baiming family member will definitely die. Then even if Dongfang Shiri can't deal with him, he'll die in that person's hands, which will naturally anger the main branch. At that time, I'll be able to use this opportunity to build a relationship with the main branch. In the end, I'll still be the one who benefits. Dongfang Ziyun's thoughts were meticulous. With a deep smile on her face, she had thought of many follow-up plans. She came from a humble background and was considered to be at the bottom of the Dongfang family's side family. She had always relied on disguises and schemes to reach her current position. Naturally, she wouldn't miss the opportunity in front of her. In her eyes, Yi Guchen was just a person who was going to die for her plan to rise to the top. Chapter 374. Yi Guchen, who had left the Tianhuang Plains on the Green Sky Eagle, naturally did not know about Dongfang Ziyun's plan. However, Dongfang Ziyun didn't know about his talent and strength. What Dongfang Ziyun did not know was that the enemy he was facing was not an ordinary youth, but a peerless sword cultivator who possessed monstrous cultivation talent and an indifferent and cold temperament. Thus, the person she should be wary of wasn't Yi Guchen. It was Dongfang Ziyun. Unfortunately, Dongfang Ziyun didn't know how terrifying Yi Guchen was. That was why she was so confident that she could use Yi Guchen as a pawn in her plan. Yi Guchen didn't worry about the Dongfang family's threat, but he didn't worry too much. Because there were more important things to do right now. Northern Liang City. Sitting cross-legged on the back of the blue sky eagle, Yi Guchen gazed into the distance. While Yi Guchen was rushing to the Great Desolation Mansion, outside the Saint Origin dynasty, in the middle of a barren mountain range. Lotus Village, Sword Heart Spring. This place was filled with sword-type Taoist rhymes all year round. In the clear spring waterfall, a young girl in a green dress was immersed in the spring water. She was like a lotus flower emerging from clear water. Even though she was in a deep coma, she was still like a beautiful painting under the contrast of the surrounding natural scenery, making people linger. The girl in the azure dress was the unconscious Su Jianshi. Two girls stood next to Su Jianshi, one on the left and one on the right. They were holding Su Jianshi's cold hands. One of the girls wore a simple cloth dress. It was Su Qiqiao. The other girl wore a light gauze dress. She had silver hair and watery eyes. It was Shui. However, at this moment, there was a trace of worry on the faces of the two girls. Big Sister Su's aura is weaker than before. Shui's eyes were covered with a layer of mist. She pouted as if she was about to cry. Don't cry. Didn't you say to trust your big brother? He'll definitely get the Saint Herb and save Big Sister Su Jianshi, Su Qiqiao comforted. Not far from them was a black-clothed young man with deep facial features. He stood there silently and stared at Su Jianshi, who was immersed in the spring water. His brows were tightly knitted like an iron lock. The black-clothed youth was Su Jianshi's older brother, Su Moyan. Two figures had appeared outside the Sword Heart Spring. One wore a hemp robe and had a beard. The other had a muscular body and carried a large hammer on his back. They were the two divine palace experts of Lotus Village, Village Chief Longyuan and Guifu. Moyanyu. Longyuan wanted to say something. Sister's situation is getting worse. I knew that Yiguchen. He died in the Void Sword Realm. Su's voices. Longyuan's and Fu's and Fu's smiled. Although the village was secluded, S's was. S was T's voice Ts and S T S Ts. They didn't tell Shui and Su Qiqiao about Yiguchen's death because they were concerned about their children's feelings. But Su Moyan couldn't accept the news. His heart was cold. Back then, he even swore that he would find the sacred medicine for my little sister. In the end, he even lost his own life. I really don't know how my little sister fell in love with this kind of person. If it was in the past, this kind of person wouldn't even be able to enter the doors of my Su family. The Su family. As Su Moyan spoke, his tone suddenly paused, as if he had touched upon some bad memory, causing his face to darken. Dragon Abyss Village Chief and Ghost Hatchet looked at each other in silence. Su Moyan took a deep breath and said firmly, "Please allow me to leave the village." "What if I don't agree?" Longyuan said helplessly. "I still have to go," said Su Moyan. He could sense that Su Jianshi's aura was getting weaker and weaker. Even Longyuan was a little worried. He felt that he was being too optimistic when he said that she could hold on for a year. Now, it seemed that Su Jianshi could hold on for a few more months. "Moyan, you have to be careful." Longyuan finally sighed. "Village Chief, Uncle Fu Gui, farewell." Su Moyan cupped his hands and left the Sword Heart Spring. His aura suddenly erupted. He was at the peak of the Divine Soul 9 transformations. His cultivation wasn't any weaker than Xian Hao and the other top prodigies of the 7 major factions. Boom. A rumble spread out. A pair of pitch-black eagle wings appeared behind Su Moyan's back. These weren't true qi wings formed by the life and death threshold. They were manifested through a secret technique. Su Moyan flapped his eagle wings and flew out of Lotus Village like a black arrow. Longyuan and Fu Gui sighed inwardly as they watched Su Moyan's departing figure. If that incident hadn't happened to the Su family, perhaps the young master's strength would be enough to compete with those prodigies of the South Horizon region. Longyuan sighed. "That's fate." Fu Gui also shook his head. Then his eyes flashed and he suddenly asked, "Longyuan, do you think Yiguchen is really dead?" "Although I don't want to believe it, the news shouldn't be wrong. However, he is someone recognized by the Divine Condor, and the Divine Condor is that person's pet." Longyuan's gaze suddenly turned to another place. It was the back mountain of the village. It was the cliff with the cave that the Divine Condor had once guarded. Even with Longyuan and Fu Gui's divine dwelling strength, when they looked at the cliff cave, their eyes were filled with boundless reverence and respect. It was as if the existence in the cave was the entire Lotus Village's faith and pillar. putting aside Su Moyan, who had left Lotus Village for the Great Desolate Mansion's 5 elemental land in search of sacred herbs. After several days of flying, Yi Guchen finally arrived at the boundary of the Great Desolate Mansion. The Great Desolate Mansion was one of the 10 great mansions of the Saint Origin Empire, because it was close to the 5 elemental land, and because it was constantly at war with the barbarian race. Its population was far less than the other mansions. However, its per capita combat strength and valiance were higher than the other mansions. This was also the reason why the prodigies of the other mansions were very afraid of the prodigies of the Great Desolate Mansion in the past. This was because most of the prodigies of the Great Desolate Mansion had fought with the barbarian race before. They had rich combat experience and were shrewd and ruthless. They were far from the flowers of the other mansions. Not long after entering the Great Desolate Mansion, Yi Guchen chose to settle down and sent the Green Sky Eagle back. This was because 1/3 of the hundreds of cities in the Great Desolate Mansion had already fallen into the hands of the barbarian race. The barbarian race was running rampant everywhere. Flying in the sky on the Green Sky Eagle was too conspicuous. It would be troublesome if he was discovered by the barbarian race. Therefore, Yi Guchen chose to travel on foot. On one hand, it was safe and concealed. On the other hand, it was also a preliminary investigation of the barbarian race. However, after a day, Yi Guchen suddenly discovered an awkward situation. He was lost. Yi Guchen looked around. Most of the terrain of the Great Desolate Mansion was desolate desert or crimson sand plains. It was very difficult to determine the direction. I can't find anyone else for the time being. There's no way to find out the direction of Northern Liang City. Yi Guchen was dressed in a black robe and wore a bamboo hat on his head. A pitch-black veil hung down and covered half of his handsome face. Yi Guchen knew that he was now a dead man. Since the Sword Sect Talon wanted to make him a secret trump card, Yi Guchen would naturally not leak the news that he was still alive in advance. Moreover, it was possible that some of the enemies of the 7 great forces would know in advance, and it would be disadvantageous to him. Just as Yi Guchen was thinking about how to get to Northern Liang City, his footsteps suddenly came to a halt. His sharp spirit sensed that the ground was shaking slightly. Yi Guchen looked around and saw that not far away, there was a group of people rushing over. There were a few figures riding Fergana horses and protecting a carriage in the middle. At the same time, Yi Guchen's sharp senses picked up a faint smell of blood. His eyes narrowed slightly. This group of people was obviously not simply rushing over. Chapter 375. Yi Guchen did not like trouble. However, Yi Guchen could not tell the direction, and the group of carriages seemed to know the way. Therefore, Yi Guchen could only go forward and ask, "Who's there?" Just as Yi Guchen walked forward, the carriage that had already rushed over suddenly stopped. The middle-aged man riding on the back of the Fergana horse in the lead looked at Yi Guchen with a face full of vigilance. The middle-aged man's face was pale and his aura was weak. It was obvious that he had suffered serious injuries. "This is my first time in the Great Desolate Mansion and I lost my way. Can you tell me where Northern Liang City is?" Yi Guchen cupped his fists and asked, "You're going to Northern Liang City too?" Seeing that Yi Guchen did not seem to be from the barbarian tribe, the middle-aged man's tone softened. "Oh, could it be that you're going to Northern Liang City too?" Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows slightly. "Yes, but it's not convenient for us now." The middle-aged man forced a smile. "Are you being hunted down?" Yi Guchen didn't beat around the bush. He spoke bluntly. The middle-aged man and the guards around him were slightly surprised. They did not expect the young man wearing a bamboo hat and black veil in front of them to be able to see through their current situation. "You're seriously injured, and there's a smell of blood on you." "It's not hard to guess," Yi Guchen said indifferently. "Little brother, since you know, I won't hide it from you. You can follow us, but if there's any danger, we can't guarantee your safety," the middle-aged man said with a wry smile. "Understood." Yi Guchen nodded slightly. The reason why he was not afraid of such danger and trouble was because he could sense the middle-aged man's cultivation base. 9 changes of soul. Based on this, he could infer that the person who was chasing them should not be above the life and death threshold. Otherwise, this man would not be just seriously injured. As long as it was not a life and death threshold, Yiguchen was not afraid. But at this moment, the curtain of the carriage was suddenly lifted, and a sharp, ear-piercing voice rang out. "Husband, what are you doing? Hurry up and leave." Yiguchen glanced around and saw two figures sitting inside the carriage. One was a middle-aged woman, and the other was a pretty young girl. The middle-aged woman had a curvaceous figure and a charming face. However, the thick layer of makeup on her face made her look like a brothel keeper. As for the young girl, she seemed to be on the other end of the spectrum. She wore a long skirt with tassels, and her beautiful face was without any makeup. Her skin was white and beautiful, and she had a youthful appearance. She gave off a gentle and delicate feeling, as if she was a daughter of a noble family. "Madam, this little brother is lost. It just so happens that he's also heading to northern Liang City. Let's bring him along," said the middle-aged man. "What? The situation is already like this, and you're still being kind? What's the use of bringing a burden along?" The middle-aged woman said sarcastically again. She seemed to think that bringing Yiguchen along would slow them down. "Madam, if we leave him here, won't we be sending the barbarian tribe to their deaths?" The middle-aged man had an upright character. He seemed to be unwilling to see Yiguchen die here. "You can rest assured. I have some ability to protect myself," Yiguchen said. He did not mind the middle-aged woman's harshness. After all, they had no obligation to bring Yiguchen along. "I'm sorry, little brother. Come with us. You'll drive the carriage in front. However, if you encounter any danger, there's nothing we can do," the middle-aged man said apologetically. "Thank you. If there's a need, I'll definitely help," Yiguchen said. He had a good impression of this straightforward middle-aged man. Oh, a young man's tone is not small. It's good that he won't be a burden. Seeing that the middle-aged man insisted on bringing Yiguchen along, the middle-aged woman curled her lips in disdain. Although Yiguchen was wearing a bamboo hat and a black veil covering his face, his voice was that of a young man's. Therefore, the woman did not think that a young man's cultivation could be strong. However, the delicate girl in the carriage looked curiously at Yiguchen. Then Yiguchen drove the carriage. The middle-aged man and several guards surrounded the carriage and moved forward. About half an hour after they left, a group of figures riding black wildebeests arrived. There were about a dozen people in this group. Each of them was tall and strong. Their bodies were as strong as bulls. The leather armor they wore could not hide their strong muscles. They were a group of barbarian tribe people. The few people in the lead were 7 feet tall. Their bodies were branded with blood-red totems. Although the pictures of the totems were different, the scarlet color caused one's heart to tremble with fear at a glance. Some of the barbarian tribe people in the rear looked at the people in the lead with reverence in their eyes. They were just ordinary barbarian tribe soldiers. However, the people in the lead were totem warriors of higher status. Lord Wuxia, the remaining members of the Xiao family should have just left, a barbarian tribe soldier said respectfully after checking the ruts on the ground. "Well, there's no time to lose. Let's hurry up and catch up with them. The girl from the Xiao family is the person that Holy Sun Xueling wants. If we can't get her back, you will all be thrown into the blood-dissolving demon pool," the totem warrior named Wuxia said coldly. Hearing about the blood-dissolving demon pool, many of the barbarian tribe soldiers around trembled. Even the barbarian tribe people who were not afraid of death would be terrified of watching their own bodies melt. After that, the barbarian tribe cavalry, led by Wuxia and other totem warriors, chased after Yiguchen and the people of the Xiao family. On the other side, Yiguchen was driving the carriage. He had also learned some basic information from the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man was called Xiao Lai. He was the master of the Xiao family in Wuyan City. The Xiao family was not a super family. It was just an ordinary small family. There was no heaven and earth spirit bridge expert. The person with the highest cultivation in the Xiao family was only Xiao Lai, the master of the 9 changes of divine soul. 7 days ago, the entire Wuyan city was attacked by the blood barbarian tribe. Xiao Lai took his wife, Madame Xiao, daughter Xiao Wanru, and a group of elders and guards out of Wuyan City. They wanted to escape to northern Liang City. However, who knew that there was a holy sun among the blood barbarian tribe who participated in the attack? The holy sun accidentally saw Xiao Wanru and wanted to capture her alive. Xiao Lai would not let his daughter fall into the hands of the blood barbarian tribe. After that he fought with the holy sun. The holy sun of the barbarian tribe was at least at the 8 changes of divine soul. Coupled with the strange totem power and various barbarian methods, Xiao Lai was not a match for him. He was even seriously injured. However, Xiao Lai and the group of elders and guards managed to carve out a bloody path for themselves. However, the elders were all sacrificed. Only Xiao Lai and a few remaining guards were left. They fled with Madame Xiao and Xiao Wanru. I have some healing elixirs. Brother Xiao, take them. After understanding the situation, Yi Guchen directly handed a jade bottle to Xiao Lai. Thank you, little brother. Xiao Lai took it casually. He did not care much at first. However, when he opened the bottle, he was shocked by the thick pill fragrance. This is a supreme grade elixir. Xiao Lai was stunned. He thought that Yi Guchen was just a lone cultivator, and the elixirs he gave should be ordinary healing elixirs. He did not expect them to be supreme grade elixirs. This level of medicinal pill was not something that anyone could casually take out. Even his Xiao family only had a few elixirs. They were treated like treasures and would not use them unless they really needed them. However, this young man in front of him casually took out a bottle, and looked like he did not care much about it. Xiao Lai looked at Yi Guchen again, and finally understood that this young man with a bamboo hat covering his face was not a simple character. Xiao Lai took the elixir and distributed it to the injured guards. "Oh right, brother Xiao, why are you going to northern Liang City?" Yi Guchen asked. In order to get rid of the blood barbarian tribe's pursuit, they did not have to go to northern Liang City. In fact, there were cities closer to northern Liang City. Firstly, northern Liang City is about to hold an exchange meeting between the 7 major forces. That should be the safest place in the entire Great Desolate Mansion. Secondly, northern Liang City is where the Shinta family is based. My daughter, Xiao Wanru, is the fiancée of the Shinta family's prodigy, Shinta Miao. Xiao Lai said with a hint of pride in his tone. Shinta Miao's fiancée? Yi Guchen's eyes revealed a strange look. Chapter 376. The Shinta family was a super family in the Great Desolate Mansion. They had a heaven and earth spirit bridge expert, and were very famous. Logically speaking, they should not have any connection with a small family like the Xiao family. However, when Xiao Lai was young, he had unintentionally saved a severely injured warrior. That warrior happened to be an important figure in the Shinta family, Shinta Miao's father. Later on, out of gratitude, Shinta Miao's father promised that if Xiao Lai had a son, he would become sworn brothers with Shinta Miao. If he had a daughter, they would become husband and wife. It was also because of this that Xiao Wanru became Shinta Miao's fiancée. Now that Black Salt City had been breached and the Xiao family was being pursued by the blood barbarian tribe's holy son, Xiao Lai, who had nowhere else to go, could only bring Xiao Wanru to the Shinta family in northern Liang City. Yi Guchen did not have a deep impression of Shinta Miao, nor did he have a good impression of him. Back in the Tianhuang Plains, Xia Yubing had joined forces with Shinta Miao to hunt him down. Shinta Miao had also attacked him in the Void Sword realm. However, Yi Guchen did not care about Shinta Miao now. He and Shinta Miao were no longer on the same level. Hence, when Yi Guchen knew that the girl in the carriage, Xiao Wanru, was Shinta Miao's fiancée, he did not have any reaction. He would not implicate his fiancée for Shinta Miao. After all, Yi Guchen would part ways with them when they reached northern Liang City. Inside the carriage, Xiao Wanru's face had a tinge of melancholy. She probed. "Mother, Wanru does not want to marry Shinta Miao." "Silly girl, what nonsense are you talking about? The Shinta family is a super family in the Great Desolate Mansion. That Shinta Miao is even more talented. He even entered a top force like the Sealed Blade Royal Palace. You have to know that the 7 major forces are existences that we can only look up to," Madame Xiao said with a yearning look. Just the Shinto family was enough to make Madame Xiao kneel, not to mention the 7 major forces. But Wanru does not like Shinto Miao, Xiao Wanru said with grievance. Xiao Wanru had seen Shinto Miao before. He was tall and strong, and his body was covered in red demonic patterns. He was no different from a barbarian. Moreover, she knew Shinto Miao's character. He called himself Mad Blade and was arrogant and conceited. Xiao Wanru really did not like people like him. Girl, do you think I don't know what you're thinking? You like sword cultivators like Yi Guqin from the sword sect. But firstly, that Yi Guqin is already dead. Secondly, even if he's not dead, with our status and identity, can we form a connection with such geniuses? Even a snobbish person like Madame Xiao would exclaim in admiration when she mentioned Yi Guqin. In her eyes, Yi Guqin's status was naturally higher than Shinto Miao's, but it was a pity that he was already dead. When Xiao Wanru heard this, her beautiful eyes were filled with disappointment. So don't even think about Yi Guqin. Just follow young Master Shinto with peace of mind. This is such a good opportunity, and it's your father's good fortune to have saved old Master Shinto. If you dare to go back on your word, I won't let you off. Madame Xiao said with conviction. In her eyes, it was glorious to be the wife of a great family's young master. However, Xiao Wanru was not only unhappy, but also wanted to go back on her word. Wasn't this a public slap to the Shinto family's face? Therefore, Madame Xiao would definitely not allow Xiao Wanru to go back on her word. Mother, you only know how to please the Shinto family. Don't you care about my happiness? Xiao Wanru's eyes were watery as she spoke with grievance. She was a young girl in her prime. Which young girl would not yearn for love? In Xiao Wanru's heart, Yi Guqin had long been the standard for her other half. Feelings are nurtured. With status and identity, there will naturally be happiness. Don't worry, I'm thinking for you. Don't make things difficult for father and mother, okay? Madame Xiao spoke with emotion and reason, leaving Xiao Wanru speechless. Although her face was full of bitterness, she still nodded with grievance. That's right. Don't worry. Young Master Shinto will not treat us unfairly, Madame Xiao said with a smile. Outside the carriage. Although Yi Guqin had no intention of eavesdropping on their conversation, Madame Xiao and Xiao Wanru's voices were not soft. Therefore, even if Yi Guqin did not want to listen, he still heard them. He did not expect that a young girl he had never met would have a trace of longing for him. However, Yi Guqin was not a sentimental person. He would not help Xiao Wanru go back on her word just because of her longing for him. This was someone else's family matter. Yi Guqin would not meddle in other people's business. Therefore, Yi Guqin only pretended not to hear and drove the carriage with peace of mind. About 2 hours later, Yi Guqin's eyes suddenly became sharp as he sat in the carriage. Big brother Xiao, you have to be careful, Yi Guqin suddenly said. Little brother, what do you mean? Xiao Lai did not understand. Yi Guqin frowned slightly. Although Xiao Lai had the cultivation of the 9 transformations of the divine soul, his perception was far inferior to Yi Guqin's. Yi Guqin could already feel the tremors of the horses' hooves coming from the ground behind them. At the same time, there was also the smell of blood. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Suddenly, a series of blood-red arrows were shot from behind. They left a trail of blood-red afterimages in the air. They were aimed at the carriage and Yi Guqin's men. Be careful. The sudden attack caused the Xiao family guards around the carriage to turn pale with fright. Xiao Lai's expression also changed. Hearing the whistling sound of the arrows, Madame Zhao's expression changed, and she hurriedly lifted the curtain. Madam, be careful. Seeing the blood-red arrows shooting towards them, Xiao Lai stepped on the horse's back and pulled Madame Zhao's hand, pulling her out of the carriage. Our daughter is still inside. Madame Xiao screamed. Xiao Lai's expression also changed. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed and he entered the carriage in a flash. At this moment, a blood-red arrow had already shot into the carriage. The thin wooden planks of the carriage were like paper, without the slightest bit of defense. Xiao Wanru's jade-like face turned pale. At this moment, an arm suddenly wrapped around Xiao Wanru's slender waist, following which, Xiao Wanru felt her delicate body being pulled into a person's embrace. Her fringed long dress was thin and her graceful body was almost pressed tightly against that person's body. Xiao Wanru was just about to struggle when she heard a young man's voice. "Don't move." Yi Guqin stretched out his other hand and caught the blood-red arrow with his bare hands. Xiao Wanru stared blankly, her eyes filled with shock. In the next moment, Yi Guqin tapped his toes and hugged Xiao Wanru as they quickly exited the carriage. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The blood-red arrows shot out in succession, turning the carriage into a sieve. "Daughter, no." Madame Xiao cried out in grief. If Xiao Wanru died, then she would have nothing to do with the Shinta family anymore. To Madame Xiao, who dreamed of being above others, this result was unacceptable. However, two figures flew out of the carriage. They were Yi Guqin and Xiao Wanru. "Thank you, little brother," Xiao Lai said emotionally when he saw that Xiao Wanru was unharmed. Seeing this, Madame Zhao's face was also filled with joy, but it suddenly darkened. "Why are you hugging my daughter? Let go of her. She is young Master Shinta Miao's fiancée." As Shinta Miao's fiancée, Madame Xiao naturally did not want to see her being hugged and taken advantage of by another man. Even though Yi Guqin had done this in a moment of desperation to save Xiao Wanru, it still made Madame Xiao unhappy. Chapter 377. Xiao Wanru, who was in Yi Guqin's arms, was a little flustered at first. But after knowing that Yi Guqin was trying to save her, she obediently did not move. The moment Yi Guqin brought her out of the carriage, the wind lifted the black veil that covered Yi Guqin's face, and Xiao Wanru inadvertently caught a glimpse of Yi Guqin's face. So beautiful! Xiao Wanru was stunned for a moment. Yi Guqin's appearance was already handsome, and with those deep dark eyes, there was a strange attraction. In comparison, Shinta Miao looked like a country bumpkin. Xiao Wanru had only heard of Yi Guqin's deeds, but had never seen him in person, so she did not know that this handsome youth in front of her was the sword master Yi Guqin that she had always yearned for. Just as Xiao Wanru was feeling curious about this youth wearing a bamboo hat, Madame Zhao's sharp voice was heard. "I'm talking to you. Quickly put down my daughter. She is not someone you can touch." Madame Xiao screamed like a plucked hen. She had already decided that Xiao Wanru would be the young madam of the Shinto family in the future. How could the young madam of a super family be touched by others? Yi Guqin's eyes were cold, and he let go of Xiao Wanru. Xiao Wanru's face turned red. It was Yi Guqin who had saved her life, but her mother still treated Yi Guqin in such a tone. "Mother, don't say any more." Xiao Wanru felt a little embarrassed and stomped her feet at Madame Xiao. At the same time, she thought that the youth might be a little angry, but Xiao Wanru was thinking too much. Why would Yi Guqin care about such things? His gaze was fixed on the approaching group of figures. The aura of the few barbarians at the front far exceeded that of the surrounding barbarian soldiers. Totem warriors. Yi Guqin's eyes showed that he was thinking. This was the first time he had met the true pillars of the barbarians, the totem warriors. Yihi Xiao family run. Wu Sang, the leader of the totem warriors, revealed a cold smile at the corners of his mouth, as if he was a vicious wolf. The barbarian soldiers had gradually surrounded them. "Master, quickly take Madam and young miss away. We'll hold them off." A guard who was injured by an arrow shouted. Because the barbarian tribe's sneak attack was caught off guard, two of the guards were directly hit by the arrows and their fighting strength dropped by half. Even if the holy son of the blood barbarian tribe did not come in person, the barbarians in front of them were not people they could casually contend with. "Hihi, do you think you can escape?" Wu Sang waved his hand. Dozens of barbarian soldiers, including a few totem warriors around him, rushed forward. "Patriarch, hurry up and leave. Don't hesitate." A guard shouted again. "Husband, let's run. Even if you don't think for yourself, you have to think for your daughter." Madame Zhao's face, which was covered with makeup, turned pale from fear when she saw the blood barbarian tribe charging toward them. She still wanted to rely on Xiao Wanru to enter the Shinto family and become the old madam. How could she be willing to die here? "Sai you all." Xiao Lai's eyes were filled with guilt. These guards were loyal to the Xiao family, but he could not protect them. However, because of Xiao Wanru, Xiao Lai finally made up his mind. Little brother, let's go. Xiao Lai did not forget to call Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin was an outsider. There was no need for him to sacrifice himself and buy time for them. Husband, don't shout. Since that young man is willing to sacrifice himself for Wanru, let him go. Madame Xiao pulled Xiao Wanru onto a horse. Seeing that Yi Guqin did not seem to have any reaction, Xiao Lai sighed deeply. He hardened his heart and turned around, leading Madame Xiao and Xiao Wanru far away. Master, be careful. Xiao Wanru cried out as she was forcefully pulled onto a horse by Madame Xiao. We can't let that Xiao family girl go. Chase after her. Wu Sang saw the situation and was about to attack. Damn barbarians, don't even think about chasing after the master. If you want to go, you have to step over my dead body first. Several guards roared and rushed forward to kill those barbarian soldiers. Then they started to fight with the totem warriors as well as those barbarian soldiers. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed and he also attacked. His target was a totem warrior. You dare to take the initiative to attack? You're courting death. When the totem warrior saw Yi Guqin charging forward, he smiled viciously. He raised the scimitar in his hand and slashed down at Yi Guqin. The barbarians were born with divine strength. In addition to the barbarians' unique body refining techniques, their strength was incomparably strong, far surpassing that of ordinary dynasty warriors. The totem warrior seemed to be able to see the young man in front of him being split in half by his scimitar. However, imagination was just imagination. Who asked him to face Yi Guqin? Clang. Yi Guqin lightly extended 2 fingers. Under the shocked gaze of the totem warrior, he directly clamped the blade of the scimitar and exerted force. Crack. A good scimitar with spiritual inscriptions was directly broken into 2 pieces. How is this possible? The totem warrior's eyes almost popped out, and his heart was in turmoil. Yi Guqin's gaze was indifferent. He directly stabbed the broken blade into the totem warrior's chest. This totem warrior did not even release his own totem before he was sent flying. He fell to the ground and did not move. Wu Sang, who was about to chase after Xiao Lai and the others, sensed the movement here. He looked over and his face suddenly froze. He saw Yi Guqin's wave-like subtle steps, as if he was a ghost. Every time he attacked, a barbarian would fall. No matter if it was an ordinary soldier or a totem warrior, they would all die in one move. Damn it, there's an expert from the dynasty. Wu Sang's face suddenly changed. As the leader of this small team, he naturally had some experience. At this moment, he did not have time to chase after Xiao Lai and the others who had fled far away. Instead, he took out a cold long blade and directly attacked Yi Guqin. 9 changes of the divine soul. Looking at Wu Sang, Yi Guqin made up his mind. This was a totem warrior whose strength was comparable to the 9 changes of the divine soul. Boy! Looking at the blood barbarians falling one by one, Wu Sang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. The totem power in his body erupted, and the cold blade light broke through the air toward Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin stretched out his hand, and a blood-red long sword with saw-like teeth fell into his hand. It was the bloody hell sword. Vigorous genuine qi poured into the bloody hell sword, directly activating the blood spirit array. A blood-red sword light blasted out, and collided with the blade light. Yi Guqin and Wu Sang were locked in a fierce battle. Every time Wu Sang landed, the power of his blade was incomparably vigorous, as if it contained the power of 1,000 caddies. But what shocked Wu Sang was that the seemingly thin youth in front of him calmly received his blade moves without the slightest bit of strain. It was as if the clouds and the wind were blowing lightly. Blood demon body refining technique. Wu Sang shouted loudly. He no longer had the slightest bit of contempt for Yi Guqin, and directly went all out. Blood-red demonic patterns spread on the surface of his body, causing his already strong body to swell like a balloon. Naturally, his strength also increased by several times. Is this the barbarian tribe's body refining technique? Yi Guqin was a little curious. Presumably, the red demonic patterns on Shen Tu Miao's body were also obtained from the barbarian tribe's body refining technique. Boy, take another blade of mine. After his strength multiplied, Wu Sang once again slashed down with his blade. Clang. Yi Guchen casually waved his sword, and Wu Sang's full-powered blade was directly sent flying. The blade shattered inch by inch as it flew out, exploding into fragments. Wu Sang was stunned, and somewhat could not believe what he had seen. Even among the totem warriors, he was considered powerful. But in the end, even after using the body-refining technique and increasing his strength by several times, he was still defeated by the youth in front of him with a bamboo hat covering his face. What did this mean? A thought appeared in Wu Sang's mind, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Damn it, you are not an ordinary dynasty ancient martial art practitioner, but a top genius of the 7 major forces. Wu Sang shouted in shock. You're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.